Lin Dao, step forward. 400 of us were standing in that courtyard in identical gray robes. The man reading the list did not look up when he said my name. I stepped forward. Ding made a mark on his paper. Ding said, "Bell Tower." Somebody behind me laughed. Here is the part that makes it art. 2 weeks before that morning, I had walked into that same man's office and put everything I owned on his desk. Every copper. The entire savings of a 15-year-old nobody stacked into one sad little pile, and he counted it twice. Ding smiled at me like a favorite uncle, and he said, "Leave it to me." I was buying a peak. Any peak. Hauling water on one of the 7 main peaks would have been fine. Sweeping a corridor where a master walked past once a week would have been fine. That was the entire plan. My whole life, converted into a bribe, converted into a plan. They gave me the bell tower. I rang that bell every morning for the next 20 years. Nobody made me. By the end of it, there were 4 men in the empire who could have stopped me, and none of them knew my name. And I still got up in the dark to do it, and I am going to tell you exactly why. But first you need to understand how a sect like this sorts its garbage. There are 7 main peaks, and if you get sent there, you sweep floors next to real cultivators, and sometimes one of them notices you and your life changes. Below that are the branch halls, which are worse but survivable. Below that is the laundry, the kitchens, the night chamber where they haul out what 4,000 disciples produce in a day. Everybody knows the ranking. Everybody prays about it. The bell tower was not on the ranking. The bell tower was a hill with a shed on it. It was not dirty. It was not hard. It had simply never, in the entire recorded history of the Divine Sword Sect, produced a single martial artist, and the reason no one fought over it was that there was nothing there to fight over. So I walked up the hill with my bundle on my shoulder, and about halfway up, the bell rang 3 times. I want to be clear that I did not have a spiritual moment. It was just loud. 3 long strokes that came down the slope and went through my chest and out the other side. My honest first thought, was that I had paid actual money for this. At the top, there was a stone platform, a rack of dark timber, and a bell hanging in it the size of a small room, green with age, covered in patterns nobody had cleaned in a century, and under it, wiping his hands on a gray rag, was the oldest human being I had ever seen. "Finally," he said, "I have been asking for years. Finally, the servants' quarters sent someone. His name was Wang. Everyone called him Old Wang, and I called him Old Wang within about a day, because he did not seem to have any other name available. Ding was almost 80. Ding had rung that bell for 64 years. 64 years, and he had never once been late. Ding had no family. Ding had no rank. Ding had no students. Ding had 1 bell and a shed and a lifetime of being exactly on time. And when he showed me the inside of the tower, I finally understood the second part of that, because the inside of that tower was insane. Hourglasses, a dozen of them, all different sizes, standing in rows on a plank shelf, like a shop for people who are afraid of the future. Big ones for the long watches, small ones for the short. Ding checked them against each other. Ding checked them against the stars. Ding adjusted them on a schedule that lived in his head and nowhere else. "First strike at the hour of Mao," he said. 2 at Chen, 7 at you. The watchmen take the night with their gongs. That is not ours. Error of more than 10 breaths is a failure. 10 breaths, 64 years. I did the arithmetic on that later and had to sit down. Ding gave me 2 days of instruction and then handed me the rope. Well, not a rope. The striker was a hanging log 10 feet long and thicker than my thigh. You did not swing it so much as convince it. And I want to describe my first morning honestly, because my first morning was a disaster. I overslept. I came out of that bed like a man who had been shot, half-dressed, 1 shoe. The old man was already standing outside in the dark with his arms folded, watching me discover panic. Ding did not shout. Ding taught me to sleep by the glass instead of by feeling, which is a skill nobody tells you is a skill. The next morning, I was up in the dark. I stood there with my hands on the log and watched the last grains go. When the last grain fell, I threw my weight forward. The log went out and the bell spoke. It was perfect. First real strike of my life, and it was perfect. And in that exact second, while the sound was still spreading out over the peaks, a line of pale text opened in the middle of my vision. Sacrificial artifact system activated. Binding to host. I would like to say I handled it well. What actually happened is that I jumped, and the log was already swinging back. It caught me in the chest and started to take me with it, and a second strike on the wrong hour would have brought half the sect up that hill. Old Wang caught the log with one hand and the back of my collar with the other. "On your first morning," he said. "On your very first morning, you nearly caused an incident." Ding went to make breakfast. I sat on the step with my heart going and read my own head. Host, Lin Dao. Cultivation level, none. Ritual vessel, morning bell, 1 out of 100. Martial arts, none. And under that, a description of the vessel, which is the part that changed everything. The bell could not be destroyed. Because it could not be destroyed, the one who served it did not age the way other men aged. One strike a day cleansed the body of the priest. The sound of it carried insight. It thinned the impurity out of you, and it fed the chi you did not have yet. One strike a day, not two. I tested that within the hour, because of course I did. I hit it again at the proper hour of Chen. I felt the whole thing again, the ringing that goes down into your bones and rearranges them, and I got a clean flash of understanding about the sword thrust fist the old man had been teaching me. My skin prickled all over like I had stepped into cold water. Progress, 1 out of 100, still 1. Only the first strike of the day counted. Everything after that was free medicine and free enlightenment. But it did not move the number. The number was the only thing that mattered, because at 100 the vessel upgraded. 100 days, that was the price. 100 sunrises where I got out of bed before anyone else on that mountain and did one thing correctly, and I remember sitting there on that cold step doing the other arithmetic, the important one. Every rank in this sect was bought, my peak was bought, the whole hill under me was somebody's failed purchase, and I had just been handed the one asset in the Divine Sword Sect that nobody wanted, nobody watched. Nobody could take, because taking it would mean climbing up here and doing it themselves at 5 in the morning for the rest of their lives. Anyone who tries to move me off this tower, I decided, is my enemy. Then old Wang called me in for breakfast, and breakfast was porridge with blood kai powder stirred into it and a strip of dried meat from some beast I could not name. I ate like a dog, and he watched me eat with an expression I did not understand yet. The routine ate the next month whole, asleep by 7 in the evening, up between 3 and 4, strike, practice, eat, check the glasses, adjust, sleep. The fist he taught me was the sword thrust fist, the sect's baseline form, the one they give to everybody because it hides the fundamentals of the sword inside it. Ding warned me it would be slow. Ding told me it took him 3 months to find his sense of qi. Official disciples do it in 1, geniuses do it in 3 days. I did not feel anything for weeks. I did not care, because the number kept going up. I made one mistake in that month. I asked him why a man with his skill had spent his whole life on a hill. His face closed like a door. Ding took his wine gourd off the peg and walked out limping. Ding stayed away for 3 days. I found out much later he had not gone far at all. Ding had gone just far enough to watch me from the trees and see whether I would keep the schedule with nobody checking. I kept the schedule. Obviously I kept the schedule. There was a progress bar. And on the night he came back, after the 7 strokes of you, something under my navel got warm. Not warm like food. Warm like a coal that had been in there the whole time and finally caught. Chi sensation. And I stabilized the seed on the first attempt, which normally takes dozens. I said nothing. I intended to say nothing for a long time. That plan lasted until lunch, because my appetite had roughly tripled. The old man watched me go through my 3rd bowl and put down his chopsticks. Lin Dao, you have already sensed your qi. I looked at the bowl. I looked at him. It seems your talent is much better than I thought, he said. And then, quieter, into his cup. What a pity. I did not ask what the pity was. I was busy reading a panel that now said cultivation level, foundation established, and vessel, 49 out of 100. That was also the month I learned what I was worth. Payday came and the old man went down the mountain and came back up hauling well over 100 caddies of supplies on his back, at almost 80 years old, and I saw him from the platform and went off the edge of it. 4 meters, landed fine, took the sacks off him. Ding made a face at me that was half scolding and half something else. 10 taels a month. That is a full year of income for a family of 3, down in the world. There was also a wooden tablet with my contribution points on it. The contribution points were where the joke lived, because contribution points were the only currency that bought anything real inside the sect, and I earned 1 a month. 1. And then he gave me a present. A strip of dried meat 2 fingers wide, from an exotic beast, the kind of thing he had eaten maybe twice in his entire life. Ding pushed it across the table like it was nothing. A few days after that, my fist finally shifted the coal in my belly and it moved, and that was internal breath. My breath came out of me like steam in a warm room. I was so hungry I could have eaten a cow and then discussed the cow. Ding looked at my face, went to his box, and came back with the last of his own beast meat. It was always meant for you, he said. It would be wasted on an old man. That was the first time I noticed I had a debt. Here's the thing about the bell that I did not tell him. Beast meat takes 3 days to digest. Mine was gone in 1. Because the sound was working on me every single morning, taking what I ate and pushing it into the body instead of leaving it to rot in the stomach. Ding noticed. Ding did not know why. Ding just started producing a strip of that meat every single month from a supply I could not find and could not price. Ding started talking to me differently, and it took me an embarrassingly long time to work out what was happening. Ding was raising a formal disciple. Ding had spent his entire life trying to become one. Ding had failed, and rather than be bitter about it, he had decided, at 79, on a hill, with one apprentice, to try again through me. The next problem was meridians. There are 2 roads to internal strength. The honest one is the fist, opening all 12 channels by yourself, which is roughly 10 times harder and takes most people a decade. The other one is a transformation technique, which is fast and cheap and damages the channels permanently, which is exactly why they hand it out to servants. It gets you to first rank and it caps you there forever, and the sect is completely fine with that. Old Wang told me 8 channels in 3 years would already be excellent. I was going to take all 12. I did not say that out loud. The panel said 99 out of 100. I was 4 months into that mountain and had not once gone down it. The 100th strike landed on the Lantern Festival, when the rules said the bell was only to be rung at Chen. 2 strokes, no more. 2 strokes. On the second one, the bell lit up. I do not have a better word. The bronze went from green to gold in front of me, and the sound stopped being sound. My body started running the sword thrust fist without asking my permission, over and over, faster than I could think about it. The chi in me went through the channels like water finding a crack. 6th, 7th, 8th, 9th, 10th, 11th, and it held there. One single channel left in the whole set. When I came out of it, the platform was covered in my own sweat, and the panel had changed. Ritual Vessel, Morning Bell, Treasure Grade, 0 out of 1,000. Sword Thrust Fist, Major Achievement, 1,000. My 100-day bar had just become a 2-year and 8-month bar, which is the classic system move. Congratulations on your promotion. Here is a longer hallway. But the vessel had grown into new abilities, and 2 of them mattered. The first was that I no longer had to be standing under it. If I held the shape of the bell in my mind, I got the effect anyway. The cleansing, the clarity, all of it. Weaker with distance, but there. Which sounds like it frees you from the tower. It does not. Weaker with distance is doing a lot of work in that sentence. At the platform, it was a flood. 10 miles away, it was a cup of water. The tower was still the only place the thing paid out in full. I was fine with that, because the tower was mine. The second was that the sound could go outward, a membrane of ki over my skin that turned aside what tried to come through it, and a wave, invisible, no volume at all, that went into a man's head and rang there. I did not have anyone to test that on yet. I made a note. I had also grown about a foot in 4 months, which is its own kind of unsettling, and one morning from the platform, I saw a boy about my age running laps around the training field with a log across his shoulders. Not a light log, a serious log. Ding had been doing it for a month. I jumped off the platform and went to meet him because I had spent 120 days talking to one person, and that person was almost 80. "Brother," I said, "which hall are you from?" "Night chamber," he said. "Bottom of the ranking, absolute floor." Ding said it the way you would say a color. His name was Guo Fei, and he was one of those people who says a thing once, then does it for a year. Ding was not chasing formal discipleship. Ding wanted to reach first rank, honestly, on his own, and take that back to his family. That was it. That was the whole ambition, and it was so clean that I felt slightly ashamed of myself for about 4 seconds. Ding was also the one who told me about the power rankings. All the servant disciples fight once a season in public. Take first place 3 years running and the sect makes you a formal disciple. No bribe, no sponsor, no family. The current number 1 was a man named Sun Renji, who was already a ranked martial artist, and who had 2 of his 3 years in hand. I filed that away, and went back up my hill. Over dinner a while later, I told the old man I had opened 8 channels. Ding put his bowl down. Ding asked me to show him the fist. I ran it in the yard while he watched with his chin down, his eyes half closed, and when I finished he stayed quiet for long enough that I started to worry. "Your fist is like a sword," he said. "The sharpness is all the way out." Then he told me not to touch the transformation technique, not to touch it even if they offered. Ding said a perfected fist would carry me further than a crippled shortcut. Ding was right, and I wanted on the record that the man who taught me the single most important lesson of my life was a servant with no rank who had failed at everything he ever tried. Ding also laid out the 2 doors, 3 years at number 1 in the rankings, or the re-examination, which you may attempt exactly once in your life, and which requires you to reach 3rd rank inside 3 years to pass. I told him I was not interested in either. Ding asked why not. I said because both of them end with me leaving this tower, and I would rather not. Ding thought I was being loyal, I was being greedy. Those look identical from the outside, which turned out to be the most useful accident of my entire life. Then, on an ordinary morning about a month later, the old man packed a small bundle. Ding told me not to miss a single strike. Ding told me to collect the supplies myself now. Ding did not tell me where he was going or when he would be back. I did not ask because I had already learned what asking did to his face. Ding limped off down the hill. Guofei disappeared around the same time. Rankings had come and gone, and he had run into a senior brother called Jian and had not lasted one exchange. Ding did not want anybody to see him for a while. So it was me, the bell, the hourglasses, the chickens I did not have yet, and a silence that got wider every day. 10 days. 15. The old man did not come back. On the 17th night, the last channel went. The Foot Taiyang channel, the last one in the set, and it opened while I was running the fist in the dark. The key came around the full circle and changed its nature on the way. It stopped being warm and started being heavy. It went from something in me to something I had, internal strength, and it hurt. It hurt like being inflated. I walked out to the old stone stele at the edge of the platform and hit it once because I could not think of anything else to do with the pressure. My knuckles were fine. The stone had a fist in it. I was not a first-rank martial artist. I was not even close. I was a martial apprentice with an intact set of 12 channels and a bell, and I stood there in the dark, grinning at a rock like an idiot. 2 days later, a runner came up the hill. "There is a woman at the gate," he said. "She says she is your family." I did not have family. Not here, not anywhere that would claim me. I went down. She was standing at the foot of the path with her hair coming apart and her sleeves wet, a girl about my age, and she had been crying at some point recently and had stopped in the way people stop when crying has not helped. I did not know her. So I asked her the only question in the world that could not be faked. "How often is the hourglass on the tower adjusted?" 13 days, she said. Nobody knew that. 2 people on the continent knew that, and one of them had taught it to me. She put a folded paper into my hand. It had been carried against skin for a while, and it had that softness paper gets. "Grandpa is dead," she said. The letter was short because he was not a writing man. "Lin Dao. This is my granddaughter, Wang Meilin. How about I betroth her to you?" Then, under that, with no transition, because he was also not a sentimental man, "When the hourglass on the tower runs out, the second chime at Chen is worth a fortune." And then, at the bottom, in worse strokes, like it had been added later and faster, "Be careful of certain people in the menial hall. Until you are a formal disciple, no one can be trusted." And under that, the last line he ever wrote to anybody, "If only I could live a few more years." I read it standing in the road with a girl I had met 4 minutes ago watching my face. I said no to the betrothal. I want to be honest about how that sounded, because it sounded terrible. I told her we would say we were cousins instead, that a cousin can be sheltered and a fiancé is a lover, that anyone who wanted to use her against me would need a reason. I was going to make sure there was not one. Then I ground his letter to powder between my palms with internal strength I had owned for 2 days and let it go into the wind. Then I got her registered under an anonymous token as Shu Meilin, 100 Herbs Garden, where the work is light and nobody looks twice. Ding had spent 64 years on a hill with no wife, no children anybody had ever seen, no rank, and no explanation. Ding had a granddaughter the whole time. Ding had hidden her from the world for her entire life, and on his way out he had left me a riddle instead of a goodbye. I went back up the hill and rang the evening bell 7 times, exactly on the hour. Then I sat down in front of a shelf of hourglasses and started thinking about what a chime could possibly be worth a fortune. I want to tell you I solved it with deduction. I solved it by being lazy on a sunny afternoon. Days of turning that sentence over. The second chime at Chen. 2 strokes at the hour of Chen. That is the rule. That is the whole rule. There was nothing in the second stroke that was not in the first. I checked the striker. I checked the frame. I checked the bell itself. Every band of pattern on it, running my hands over 300 years of grime like a man frisking a wall. Then I sat down on the step at the wrong time of day with nothing in my head, and the sun came in under the eaves at a low angle. The bell and the frame threw their shadow across the shelf. Every hourglass went dark, except one. One of them sat in a gap in the shadow with the light going straight through it, and on the glass, faint as breath, there were lines. A hill, a tower on the hill, and a second mark, off to the side, where there was nothing. I walked out to the second mark and found a large rock and a crooked tree growing out of a split in it, and on the trunk, low down, there were scratches. Old ones. An arrow, pointing down. I got a hoe. The box was small, and the paper inside it was heavy craft paper. There were 2 things on it. A map, drawn properly, by somebody who could draw. And a note. A great opportunity waits for you. That opportunity contains great danger. Do not go until you are a ranked martial artist. The map had been left by an innate master. That is the tier above everything I could see from where I was standing, the tier where men stop being men. Ding had hidden his techniques and everything he owned, and he had drawn where, and at the bottom, one more line, which is the line that ran the next 20 years of my life. Besides me, several other people know this treasure map exists. Several other people. So I sat there in the dirt and I read that map until my eyes hurt. Then I read it again. Then I closed my eyes and drew it in my head and opened them and checked. I did that until I could have drawn it on a wall in the dark. Then I took my knife and scraped every line off the paper. Then I cut the paper into pieces. Then I broke the box, buried all of it, and put leaves over the hole. I was very pleased with myself. Remember that. In about 10 years, that decision is going to cost me something that cannot be bought. I am going to stand over that exact patch of ground and say some things about my younger self. But right then, it made sense, and it explained the old man. 64 years on a hill. No family anyone had seen. Never left. Ding was not devoted. Ding was hiding, and the thing he was hiding was under my fingernails. Half a year went by quietly. Vessel, 312 out of 1,000. Internal strength, holding. Then I had a visitor. Ding came up the path with a fast step for a man that age. Black beard, good robes, and he asked about old Wang. Where had he gone? When was he due back? And while he asked, he looked at everything on that platform. And I mean everything. The shed, the shelf, the ground, my hands. Then he tossed me a small bottle. A chi blood pill, he said. A small gift from me. If the old man comes back, tell me. I am the steward of the errand hall. Surname, Ma. Ding left. I opened the bottle. One pill. There was one pill in it. Does he think I am a beggar? This man walks up a mountain to interrogate a servant about a dead man's estate, and he brings a single pill in a bottle, so the bottle can do the talking. I did not eat it. I fed shavings of it to the chickens over the next few months, and the chickens were noticeably more energetic, so at least it was real, which somehow made it worse. Yes, chickens. I started a garden and a coop and a few ducks because I was 17, alone on a hill. The alternative was talking to hourglasses. Guo Fei came back around then, and Guo Fei turned out to be the most useful thing on that mountain, because Guo Fei talked to people, and I did not. Ding is the one who told me my new cousin had attached herself to a man named Xia Jin. Number 2 in the power rankings at the time, on his way to number 1, and famous for exactly the reason you are already thinking. I thought about that for a while and decided it was her life. Guo Fei is also the one who found me the black market. There is a black market inside the sect. Of course there is. In the abandoned forges, 3 or 4 nights a month, run by a man who stands in the dark where you cannot see his face and who has the pressure of a real master coming off him like heat off a stove. One contribution point is 1 pill, he said. I do not sell them singly. A bottle is 12. 10 points. 10 points. I earned 1 a month. Let me set that scene properly, because it is the only place in this story where I was ever genuinely out of my depth in a room. The abandoned forges are on the backside of the mountain where the ore used to come in, and nobody has fired them in 60 years. The way you find out the market is running is that Guo Fei hears from a boy in the kitchens that a certain deacon has requested a lantern. There is no password. There is a man at the mouth of the shaft who looks at you and decides. Inside, there were maybe 30 people and not one of them was standing near anybody else. Everyone had their hood up. Everyone had come alone. And the seller sat at the back where the forge mouth used to be, in a dark that was darker than it should have been. I could not see one feature of his face. The pressure coming off him was the flat, patient heat of a man for whom this entire room is a small business. I put every point I owned on that table, 2 years of it. The deacon who logged the transfer was fat and cheerful and clearly did this every week. Ding fitted a formal key into the mechanism in my wooden tablet, turned it, and watched the number drop, and then we both signed a ledger, an actual ledger, with a brush. 2 men in a criminal market on a mountain, being scrupulous about the paperwork, and I want you to know I signed my real name because I had already worked out that anybody with the standing to punish me for it was already in the room. I walked the shelves on the way out because I would not get another chance. Wound salves, poisons, openly. 3 separate things for sale that were labeled only by a peak name and a number, and at the end, in a flat lacquer case, a real internal technique. 2,000 contribution points. I stood there and did the arithmetic that I had promised myself I would stop doing. 2,000 months, 166 years, and that was the cheap one. The case next to it was 10 times the price. The system this sect runs on is not cruel. It is worse than cruel. It is arithmetic, and everybody who ever explained it to me explained it kindly. Then I walked back up my hill and found the hair on my door frame broken. I had been tying a hair across that door for months. It had been breaking for months. Somebody had been coming into my house, carefully, regularly, and finding nothing, and coming back. I started taking a pill a day. On the 6th pill, the Ren channel opened, the great circuit closed. The internal strength in me turned over into internal qi. I put 2 fingers out and a blade of qi came off the tips, 3 feet of it, 1 foot of it actually able to cut anything. First rank, ranked martial artist. 2 years and a bit after they put me on a hill to fail, then progress stopped. 6 months of nothing. First rank, 17 out of 100. Vessel at 721. 3 points a month, which at that rate meant second rank sometime around my 30th birthday, and I remember standing on the platform doing that arithmetic and saying the words out loud, "It is too slow," to an audience of ducks. Guo Fei hauled buckets of night soil up my hill for the garden, which is a thing a friend does, and kept asking me to enter the rankings, which I kept refusing. And then one afternoon in the middle of a form I had run about 9,000 times, the fist finished, I felt it land, the whole shape closed up and became one thing. The force came off my knuckles and went out and hit an hourglass a full meter away and burst it. A meter. It had been a foot for a year. Sword thrust fist. Perfect. What perfection actually did was quieter and much bigger. One run of the form used to move my QE around part of a circuit. Now one run moved it around all of it. My cultivation speed went up 4 or 5 times overnight. The ceiling I had been grinding my face against turned out to be a step, and something else started happening. Running a perfected fist, I could feel the sword inside it. The old man had told me the sect hides the fundamentals of the sword in that form, and I had nodded politely. Now it was surfacing on its own, a pure sword shape trying to come out of a punch. I went through the junk pile behind the shed and found a rusted short sword. I spent 3 evenings putting an edge back on it and cutting a scabbard out of scrap wood. First weapon I ever owned. It was garbage. I loved it. 2 nights later I found out what it was for. There was a moon that night. The watchman's gong had gone past midnight and I was awake, which was luck. The shadow came through my door without making one single sound. Not a scrape, not a breath. A hand going straight for my throat in the dark. I came off the bed sideways with the rusted sword already moving, and he caught the blade. Caught it. Open palm, no hesitation, the way you would catch a thrown apple because he was a ranked martial artist. I was a servant with a rusty knife, so I rang the bell inside his skull. I had never used it on a person. It went out of me and into him. I watched a trained killer turn into furniture. His whole body locked. His key came apart. The hand that had my blade forgot it had my blade. I went out from under him like something going down a drain and put the sword through his back, into the spine, and it was over. His last motion was a palm strike into my bed, which stopped being a bed. I want to describe what happens after your first one, because nobody does. There was no triumph. My hands went cold to the wrist. My scalp crawled. I stood in a room I had lived in for 2 years, with a body on the floor. I could not make my fingers unlock from the handle for a long time. Then I turned him over and took the mask off. Steward Ma. Black beard. Good robes. The man who brought me 1 pill in a bottle. Old Wang had written "Be careful of certain people" in the menial hall. I had read it as advice, and it had been a name with the letters missing. I searched him, because I am not a poet. 3 bottles, 9 key blood pills, wound powder, a jar of golden jade salve. A contribution tablet with over 500 points on it, which was useless since only the owner can transfer, a dagger, banknotes, and a thin book. Bright jade palm, a real technique, a tier above anything a servant sees, requiring a rare salve to practice. It took me a bit over an hour to make him disappear. Buried behind the hill, floor washed, room aired out. The technique I read 4 times. Then used to start the cooking fire, because practicing a dead steward's signature palm form is the single stupidest thing a suspect can do, and I intended to remain a non-suspect. Half a month later, the errand hall sent people to ask questions. They did not ask me any. Why would they? As one of them said out loud, in front of me, in a voice you use for furniture, how could a utility disciple of barely 2 years possibly be involved? I would like to thank the Divine Sword Sect for its consistent low opinion of me. It has been worth more than any technique I ever bought. The next man who came up my hill did not come at night, which was somehow worse. Ding was in his 30s, and he introduced himself as Xia Jin. Ding was the new number 1 in the power rankings, having taken it off Sun Renji in the man's 3rd year, which had ended Sun Renji's entire life plan in an afternoon. Xu Meilin is your cousin, he said. Not a question. She is. You are from White Jade City in Zhanghe County, the wealthy Lin family. Ding let that sit. There are no relatives named Shu anywhere in that family, in-laws included. Ding had done homework, on a servant. Then he told me the rest, which was that she had told him everything, over time, the way you do when you like someone, her grandfather, the tower, what the old man had left behind. Let us work together, he said, and he actually smiled. I told him I had no idea what he was talking about. I told him the old man had left me a shed and a debt of hourglasses. His face cooled off then, and he gave me the real message, which is the one he had climbed the hill to deliver. What old Wang left behind has already been noticed by a big shot in the inner sect. There it is. Several other people know this treasure map exists. I looked at him and said the only sentence available to me. Senior brother Zia, we are both utility disciples, not superior and subordinate. Ding went down the hill, and I sat on my step and finally understood the timetable I was on. It was not a race against my own talent. There was a man in the inner sect with real power who wanted a thing that was currently memorized inside my head, and between him and me there was nothing at all. No master, no rank, no name. A servant can vanish off a hill. The sect will send someone to ask the neighbors nothing. The old man's letter had told me the answer 2 years earlier. I had been too comfortable to hear it. Until you are a formal disciple, no one can be trusted, so I stopped being comfortable. I did not go to the errand hall to apply for the re-examination. The errand hall was where Ma had come from. I had recently buried the errand hall behind a hill. Instead, I went looking for the man who administers it personally in the valley where he lives. That valley took most of a day. At the end of it, there was a waterfall and a hut, and in front of the hut there was a chair, and in the chair there was a drunk old man who had not shaved in a week and did not open both eyes when I arrived. I knelt and said the formal words. Junior wishes to retake the examination. Ding asked how old I was. 17. How long a servant? 2 years, 2 months, 11 days. Whether I had trained before entering the sect? No. What I practiced? Sword thrust fist. There was a pause with a great deal in it. That is a basic fist technique, he said. It is not easy to reach the rank of master with only that. Then he sat up in the chair properly, for the first time, and told me to run it. So I ran the sword thrust fist in front of a drunk gatekeeper in a valley, the whole form, the way I had run it 4,000 mornings on a platform in the dark with a bell over my head. When I finished, his eyes were open, and there was nothing drunk in them at all. Young man, he said, would you like to be my disciple? I was on my knees before he finished the sentence. I did not ask his rank. I did not ask his lineage. I did not ask what it would cost me. There are maybe 4 moments in a life where the correct answer is instant, and a stranger offering you a door out of the bottom is all 4 of them at once. Good, he said. From now on, you are the personal disciple of Tang An. Then I asked him for one thing, and it was not a technique. I asked to stay on the bell tower. Ding looked at me for a while. I braced for the argument. The morning bell and the evening drum, he said, thought-provoking. They clean the mind. Fine, stay. I have rarely worked so hard to keep something so worthless. What he handed me the next day was a thin yellowed manual. The title on it was the Heartless Sword Manual. It was an internal technique and a sword art bound together in one thing. It did not care about my build. It did not care how many channels I had opened or how fast. It was built entirely on comprehension, which is the one attribute nobody in this world can measure, buy, or inherit. I understood maybe 15% of it on the first read. Ding sat with me and translated the terms out loud, personally, like a man teaching a child to read, and then he emptied his cupboard on me, a formal disciple's token which doubles as the contribution tablet, chi and blood pills, spirit nurturing pills, a pound of exotic beast meat, and I want to note that the official ration for a formal disciple is 2 ounces. So my master had just committed a small crime in front of me. And a real sword, a treasure-grade sword, with an edge that took the light and did something unkind with it. Then he went home, and I went up my hill and tried to practice. I could not hold the chi, it kept scattering. The technique wanted a stillness I did not have, so I rang the bell in my head. The chi went obedient like a dog that has just remembered who feeds it. 1 circuit, 1 point of progress. Before that, 2 days per point, 5 circuits a day, 5 points a day. 10 times the efficiency, and that is before the bell's morning strike, which was still quietly doing its work on the body underneath all of it. And somewhere in a restaurant in Linjian City, on a night I only heard about later, Xiajin was being told the news by the man who had been paying him. I know how that went because too many people were in the room. There was a young lord in brocade at the head of the table, and Xiajin leaning in the way you lean when you are somebody's tool. You know it. And Xiajin said, Lindao has become a formal disciple. This mission ends here. And the young lord in brocade set down his cup and said, fine. And Xiajin said, Senior Brother Wu, you said before that you would support me. And Senior Brother Wu said, I am not talking to you anymore. Get out. That is the whole scene. That is what happened to the #1 ranked servant in the Divine Sword Sect. Ding had not beaten Sun Renji with talent. He had beaten him with somebody else's pills. The moment the pills stopped, he could do the arithmetic as well as anyone. Ding could not hold first place for another 2 years. Ding had also gone up a hill and threatened a man who was now a formal disciple with a master. Ding filed a petition to leave the mountain and go home to the mortal world, and I never saw him again. I did not celebrate because I had just learned the name of the person behind him. The name was not Xiajin. My master had a way of explaining things that made you feel stupid for a second and then rich for a year. Internal strength is the method, he said. Martial arts are the means of attack. Secret techniques are the trump card. A true disciple of this sect needs all 3. Then he told me the good part. A secret technique is normally locked behind your cultivation level, the way most things are. The Heartless Sword Manual does not work that way. If your comprehension is high enough, it will open a secret technique to you before you have any right to it. If comprehension is high enough, he said, Even a man with mediocre talent can defy fate. Ding set it flat into his cup, like a fact about weather. It took me a shamefully long time to notice that he was not talking about me. Ding was a gatekeeper in a valley with no students and 4 swords on his wall, and he had been proving that sentence to an empty room for 30 years. I put the sword art and the internal technique together, which the manual wanted. I had been too careful to try. My progress went from 1 point a circuit to 2. Inside a few weeks, I was 2nd rank. And 3 years after they read my name off a list, the bell hit 993 out of 1,000. I remember what we were talking about that week, because it was the first time I heard the words sword tomb. My master brought it up over dinner. The sect opens it once in a very long while, normally only for true disciples, 1 visit in a lifetime, and this time they were letting formal disciples in as well. I asked what was in it. Swords, he said, which was the most Tangan answer available. Then he told me about his own 4 up on the wall of that hut, and I finally understood that they were not decorations, they were a resume, a sharp one which he used until he was 20, a soft one to 30, a heavy black one with no edge at all to 40, and after 40, a rotten wooden stick. Grass, trees, bamboo, stones, he said, all of them can be a sword. Then he added cheerfully that he had never once seen anybody actually do that, including himself. I told him I would skip the sword tomb this time. Ding gave me a look. I had a reason. The reason was that the bell was 7 points from upgrading. I was not going to be somewhere else when it happened. It happened on an ordinary morning at the hour of Mao, and I hit it and the platform lit up. I have described the first upgrade as a flood. The second one was drowning, in the good way. I stood inside the sound the way you stand inside water. My body took over and ran the internal technique on its own. Then it did the thing I did not expect. It corrected me. Halfway through, I felt the chi turn a corner it had never turned before. I realized, with a distinctly unpleasant lurch, that I had been running the mind cultivation portion slightly wrong for months and had never once noticed. When I could see again, the panel had moved a long way. Cultivation, 7th rank. Ritual vessel, morning bell, law grade, 0 out of 10,000. Heartless sword manual, major achievement, 10,000. At my rate, that was 27 years. I did that arithmetic and laughed out loud on an empty platform, because what else do you do? But the abilities were absurd. The defensive membrane got thicker and the sound strike got heavier. Fine. Expected. Then 2 new lines. Concealment. The bell would hide me. My cultivation level, my key, whatever a stranger's spiritual sense reached for, the bell would answer for me, and it would lie. My own master, sitting 3 feet away, stopped being able to read my level. Ding assumed his injury had gotten worse. I let him assume it, which is not the last time I did something like that. It is the entry I would remove first if I could, and self-repair. The vessel could not be destroyed, so the vessel repaired itself, and the vessel repaired its priest. Even if the priest were injured beyond what medicine could reach. I did not appreciate that line at the time. I read it as a nice safety feature. It is going to be the reason I am alive to tell you any of this. 3 days after that, I got a visitor in the rain. She was standing at the bottom of my path in a wet gray robe with her hands wrapped in cloth, and it took me a second to place her, because Wang Meilin had lost about 15 pounds since the last time I saw her. They had moved her to the laundry, from the 100 Herbs Garden, which is a soft posting, to the laundry, which is where you put someone when you want their hands ruined. I was too naive back then, she said. I misjudged people. I asked who did it. Wu Tian. Formal disciple of Dripping Water Peak, student of Elder Shen Long, the young lord in brocade from the restaurant. Ding had run out of jiajin, so he had gone to the source and started squeezing. I went down to the errand hall myself, and here is the small pleasure of that day. Xu Jian, the deputy hallmaster, came out from behind his desk to meet me and called me senior brother. Ding meant it, because a servant off the bell tower who came back as a formal disciple with a personal master had become a kind of ghost story down there. I had her transferred back that afternoon. It took 4 minutes. The same 4 minutes would have been impossible a year earlier, and it cost me nothing but a name. Wu Tian came up the hill the next day. Ding was polite. Ding complimented the view. Ding asked eventually about the old man's inheritance. I told him the truth, which was easily the strangest weapon in my possession. The map does not exist anymore. I scraped it and burned the pieces. Leave the girl alone. Ding smiled and said of course, and turned to go, and about 4 steps down the path he spun and put a finger sword into my back with no warning at all. It hit the membrane. There is a sound that a technique makes when it lands on something it cannot get through, and it is not a good sound if you are the one who threw it. It went off my back like a hammer off a bell, which, fair. I turned around and returned it with 1 finger, and Wu Tian went backwards down 4 stairs. Junior brother Lin, he said from the ground, I only wanted to experience your skills. At which point I called the sword off the wall of my shed. I had been practicing that for a month, It had never once worked cleanly in front of an audience, and it worked then. It came out of the doorway and across 20 feet of air into my hand with a flash of light behind it. One exchange. His soft sword went into the dirt. There was a line across his throat that had not broken the skin because I stopped it there. 18 years of formal disciple. Ding had been inside the sword tomb. Ding had a master who sat on the sect council. In swordsmanship, he said, standing up very carefully, I am far inferior to junior brother Lin. Ding went down the hill. Ding did not come back for years. When he did come back, it was in a much funnier context. Winter came. 8th rank. Heartless sword manual sitting at 99 out of 100 and refusing to move, exactly the way the fist had refused, which at least meant I recognized the wall, and my master said the word I had been avoiding. Missions. Inner sect disciples take one a year. It is not optional in any way that matters because everything you eat and everything you learn is priced in contribution points, and refusing missions means you are an inner sect disciple in name and a decorative hermit in fact. Ding also handed me the true interpretation of the Heartless Sword Manual that day, the parts a lineage does not write down. Then he sent me to the mission hall. The mission hall makes the errand hall look like a shed, which is because it is a palace. The errand hall is a shed. The inner missions go in minutes, snapped up by people with information. What is left hanging on the wall for the rest of us is the outer work. Bandits, warrants, escort, guarding a mine, picking herbs for an alchemist who will complain about the herbs. I took an escort job. 10 days, 5th rank minimum, 300 contribution points. 300 points. When I was a utility disciple, that was 300 months of my life. And the destination on the card was White Jade City, which was, of all the places on the map of the world, the city this body had been born in. I rode a horse for the first time in 3 years and discovered that riding a horse is a martial art nobody warns you about. The client was the Yongcheng Trading Company, which was founded by an elder of the sect, which explains a great deal about what happened later. I arrived a full day before the muster. That is because I had ridden back up my mountain the night before to make the morning strike and then come down again. It is a detour of some hours. I will be doing it for the rest of this story, so let us agree now that it is normal. The company manager stared at me. Nobody arrives early to escort a caravan. There were 8 inner disciples on the job. The one who mattered was a woman in white with a silver half mask and a sword on her back and her hair tied up, and she was 7th rank. She was the strongest person in the courtyard by a distance. Jisoo. Everyone else deferred without being told to. When they asked my level, I said 6th rank. It was a lie by 1 rank, which is the perfect size of lie. I have never regretted a single one of them. I also noticed something the others did not seem to think about. A trading company owned by an elder of the Divine Sword Sect, moving cargo across 2 prefectures, and it had no guards of its own. None. Just 8 rented disciples who did not know what was in the crates. 5 days out, 1 day from the city. I had the watch. The gong in the town had just called 1:15. There was a whisper of air and a crossbow bolt went into the boards exactly where my head had been. I was already moving, and I shouted the 2 words you get 1 chance to shout. Enemy attack. Poisoned bolts. 17 or 18 men in the yard and shooters up on the roofs, and they had been watching us long enough to know which room held who. I rang the bell. 10 miles from my tower, it is a cup of water. A cup of water in a man's head still stops him for about 1/4 of a second, and 1/4 of a second is a very long time when you have a sword. The first one opened his throat on my edge on the way past. The second one took it in the chest without ever getting his guard up. Jisoo had everyone in formation by then, back to back, which was correct and also useless because their leader came in over the wall. Ding was a big man in a mask with a saber shaped like a ghost's head, and he was 9th rank. Ding broke Jisoo's guard with 1 strike. 1. She went down with red across all that white and did not get up. I gave her a chance, he said, and she did not take it. Well then, you can all die. Bolts came in on me and stopped an inch from my skin. That is when he noticed me specifically, and his voice changed. I did not expect the Divine Sword Sect to send 2 elites. Ding was wrong about the number. I was about to explain that to him at some length, and then the night got loud. How dare you? You dare injure disciples of my Divine Sword Sect. An innate came out of the dark. I had never seen one work. I have described the difference in rank a dozen times in this story, and none of it prepares you. Ding was an elder in a blue robe from Jade Screen Peak, and he did not draw anything. Ding moved his hand and 12 men were on the ground, and the leader with the ghost head saber, 9th rank, the man who had ended Jisoo in 1 exchange, got a thread of chi through the skull before he finished turning around. Then the elder collected the wounded, told us to continue the mission, and went up into the sky. Everyone was hurt, everyone except me, and I did not have a single drop on my robe because of the membrane, and one of them said out loud in a tone of some awe that I was a very clean person. I sat on a crate afterward and asked myself the honest question, could I take him, the elder, not the bandit? The answer was no, and the second answer, which arrived immediately after, is the one that shaped everything I did for the next 15 years. I would rather beat the weak with the strong. Every single time. Fair fights are for people who have not thought it through. The others were whispering about the cargo. What is in the crates? Why was an elder of the sect already within a minute's flight of an ambush he could not have known about? Nobody said the obvious sentence, which is that we were not the escort, we were the bait, and the crates were the hook. I said nothing at all, collected my points, and went to find breakfast in the city where I had been born. The restaurant was called the Dongchen. It served a moon wine that I would like to recommend to you across time and space. I was 3 cups in when a girl in pink stopped dead in the middle of the room. Brother Dao, Lin Meng, my cousin. She had a fiancé with her in an expensive coat. She left him standing in the middle of the floor like a coat rack and came over. Where have you been all these years? I asked her not to tell anyone. She agreed, and then she did what family does, which is defend the indefensible in a soft voice. Auntie really was too much, she said, but uncle still cares about you. Here is what a stepmother's version of too much looks like. This body's mother died when he was 5 or 6. The stepmother arrived, produced a son, and spent the next decade making sure the first son had nothing, learned nothing, and was worth nothing. When the bone reader came through the city and pronounced the boy's talent negligible, she made sure everyone at the table heard it. That is the specific and boring evil of a house in decline. It is not a knife, it is a ledger. She kept her word for about 4 hours. By dinner, the house steward was at my door with an invitation. I declined. An hour after that, my father came through the door of the inn himself with 6 servants behind him. Lin Dao. Come back with me. Lin Yuan, second master of the Lin family, of a scholarly house that had been sliding downhill since my grandfather held a 4th-rank post, and a man whose entire idea of authority was volume. I told him the truth in 1 sentence. From the day I left the Lin family, I have had no intention of returning. I will not compete with Lin Hao over any of it. Ding turned red and told them to tie me. I swept my arm and 6 men went into the wall like laundry. There was a silence of a specific quality, the kind where somebody's understanding of the world is being reissued. Father, I said, this is the last time I will call you that. I will be the master of my own life. The treasure sword came off the table into my hand on the way out. I heard Zhang Bo explaining behind me, in the tone of a man who is enjoying himself, that his eldest son was an inner disciple of the Divine Sword Sect. I found out later he stood there for a long time. Ding was remembering the bone reader, and the price of the bone reader, and what he had done with the information. I also found out later that my stepmother heard the whole story at her pond, feeding her fish, and was delighted. Not because he came back rich, because he had left angry, and every year of that anger was another year her son was safe. I rode back up the mountain a day ahead of the others, obviously, because there was a bell. 8 days of missed strikes had let every hourglass on the shelf run dry. I spent an afternoon rebuilding time out of the sun and the town gong like a man restoring a clock from memory. The payout came in at 500 points instead of 300. Hazard adjustment. My master listened to the whole ambush story and did not look surprised at any point. As a martial artist, he said, you will meet more and more of these kinds of things. And that night, running the evening form after 7 strokes at you, the wall I had been stuck against for months simply was not there. I had a sword in my hand. I had a sword on my body. I had no sword in my heart. That was the missing sentence. That was the whole thing. The panel rewrote itself in front of me. Heartless sword manual. Perfection. Martial intent, heartless sword intent, illusory grade, 1 out of 100, and a line that had never existed before. Secret technique, myriad transformations, sword chi. I read the description of that one 3 times. It does not draw on my ki. It draws on the origin key of heaven and earth. That is the thing men become innate in order to do. That is the border of the whole system. I was standing on the wrong side of it, holding a technique that ignored the border. And that was the moment the mission stopped being a tax and started being fuel. Everything I broke through on for the next 10 years, I broke through on the road, coming home, angry, tired, and slightly changed. When I told my master, he came out of his chair. You grasped a sword intent? Then he sat down and gave me the single most valuable sentence anyone has ever given me for free. When your cultivation reaches the perfection of the 9th rank, he said, never choose to break through directly into innate, because there is a gap between them. Everyone treats the 9th rank and the innate realm as neighbors, and they are not. In between, there is a state most people never touch, where the body is finished, flawless, nothing left in it that shouldn't be. Get there with a martial intent already grown, and what comes out the other side is not an ordinary innate, it is a perfect one. And a perfect innate, he said, does not merely have a better ceiling. A perfect innate becomes a martial saint, not might, does. The catch is the innate pill. There is a pill that will simply hand you the innate realm, and it costs a fortune, and everyone in the world with a fortune buys one, and it burns the flawless state off you permanently on the way through the door. Which means the richer you are, the more certainly you throw away the only path that matters. So the plan became simple and extremely boring. Grind to the perfection of 9th rank, then stop, then keep grinding while standing still. I was very good at boring. I had a bell. Half a year later, I was 9th rank, and a boy from the errand hall came up my path to tell me someone from my family was at the gate. I sent back one word: no. They came again. And this time Shujian himself brought a box up the mountain because he had been handed a gold note the size of a small house to make sure it arrived, and I let him leave it, the Lin family seal in lacquer, inside thousands of taels in gold notes. So this is the plan: fund my cultivation with the family money and buy back a son. Unfortunately for that plan, I was at the stage where money buys nothing I need. I put the box in the cellar without counting it. Down in White Jade City, my stepmother was interrogating the house steward about that box. The steward, who was old and tired, gave her the number: 6,000 taels. 6,000 taels, she said. Are they not planning to live comfortably ever again? She was not worried about the money. She was worried about the shape of it. A man who sends 6,000 taels to a son who will not speak to him is a man who has started paying a debt, and a debt that size ends with her boy on the street. Meanwhile, up on the sect council, a fat elder named Ding was baiting my master in front of everybody. Old Tang, he said, you do not have a disciple. Who said I do not have a disciple? I heard about that one from 3 different people. I understand he did not elaborate. I understand he just sat there enjoying himself while the sect leader moved on to the actual business, which was that this year there was exactly one opening for a true disciple. And a few days later, for the first time in 4 years, my master climbed my hill himself. Ding walked around the platform. Ding looked at the shelf of hourglasses. Ding looked at the bell, and at the chickens, and at the vegetable rows, and at a young man who had chosen to live in a shed. If you can endure loneliness, he said, and even enjoy the quiet it brings, then you have found your own road. Then he sat down on my step and told me why he had been a gatekeeper for 30 years. Ding had not been demoted. Ding had not been disgraced. Ding had asked for that post in a valley on the road into the sect, so that every single person entering the Divine Sword Sect for any reason had to walk past him. Aptitude is easy to measure, he said. Comprehension is not. So I sat where they all have to come through, and I waited. 30 years of drinking in a chair and watching people walk by, so that one day a servant would come up the path and run a beginner's fist so cleanly it made him sit up. Then he told me what he actually wanted from the true disciple selection, and it was not the position. Go in, he said. Do not fight for the seat. In the sword-sharpening cave there are murals. Find the 8th one on the left. Inside that mural, hidden, is the flawless Vajra skill. His lineage has been working on that mural for 6 generations. 6. Nobody has ever gotten it out. Since the founding of this sect, he said, it is said only the founding ancestor ever mastered it. Ding said it the way you hand someone a rock you have carried up a mountain and can no longer lift. Before I get to the cave, I have to tell you about Guofei's shoulder, because it is the day our friendship changed shape and I did not enjoy it. Ding came up the hill with a bruise across his collarbone and a story about a hook sword. Ding had parried with an intercepting form and gotten hit anyway. Ding was embarrassed about it, and he wanted me to tell him the parry was fine. I put 2 fingers on him instead and read the damage. It was not the hook sword. It was the log. A year and a half of carrying a log across those shoulders had packed the chi solid at 2 points on his chest and back, and it had been quietly getting worse the entire time. I ran internal ki through both knots. Ding went down on the floor of my shed like a dropped coat and lay there breathing. Brother Dao, he said from the floor, you have actually become a ranked martial artist. His voice did the thing. There was a wobble in it. And from that day he was more polite to me, and I hated it. There was absolutely nothing I could do about it, because he was right. Ding had known me when we were both nothing. Now one of us had a master. The selection was held on the square in front of the Divine Sword Hall. There were thousands of people watching, 19 candidates, under 25, secret technique mandatory, and you must not already be innate. The crowd had favorites. Lin Hu, Mei, Jen. Their names went around the square like weather. Nobody had a favorite named Lin Dao, which was correct, because until a month earlier, the correct thing to say about Lin Dao was Hu. The escort crew spotted me though. Zhang Bo came over grinning and said it seemed they had all underestimated junior brother Lin, and Jisoo, mask and all, looked at me with a small frown and asked why she had never heard my name inside the inner sect. I said I lived on a hill. I also acquired Zikang that day, which was not a decision I made. Xie Kang was a bald, cheerful, enormously talkative disciple from Wook Peak who introduced himself, told me his entire family history, asked me 3 personal questions, and attached himself to me for the next 20 years of this story. I have never worked out how it happened. Ding is one of the 4 best things that ever happened to me. I still do not know how it happened. 10 true disciples in masks came out to supervise, and a senior brother named Kai read the rules. You may leave the cave at any time. You must be out before dark. If you cannot bear the pressure, get out. Fighting over a sword seed is permitted. Killing a fellow disciple over one is not. And then, in a completely different voice, damage a mural, and you will be executed on the spot. Inside, the pressure started immediately. Not weight, intent. Somebody else's conviction pressing on the inside of your skull, and I watched what 19 well-trained young people do with that. They ran. Every one of them went straight down the throat of that cave at a jog because the sword seeds are in the depths. The sword seeds are what the position is scored on. The position is what their masters had spent 4 years and a great deal of money preparing them for. Zhen Shan went past me at the front. Zikong went past me breathing hard and grinning. A girl from Lingshu Peak, whose name I never learned, went past me and did not see me at all. They were completely correct. That is the part I want to be fair about. If you have any chance at that seat, running is the right move, and standing at a wall counting pictures is the behavior of a man throwing away the only opportunity of his life. I walked along the left-hand wall counting. The murals are cut straight into the rock. They are old enough that some of them have lost their edges. The first one is a man holding a sword over his head with both hands. It is beautiful, and it is a beginner's first stance. The second is the same man with the sword down. The third has 3 figures in it. By the 6th, they are not really figures anymore. By the 7th, I could feel my own intent trying to move on its own when I looked, which is not a sensation I recommend. The 8th mural was a mess, honestly. Chaotic hacked lines that did not resolve into anything, and in the middle of them, a stick figure drawn the way a child draws a person. I put my intent against it. The stick figure moved. It came alive and ran a form. I recognized the form because the form was my form. It was the Heartless Sword Manual, being performed on a wall by a scribble, 600 years before I was born. I pushed harder, and my head started to go. 6 generations of my lineage had gotten exactly this far, then had to stop, and I could feel why. There is a limit to how long you can hold that much of yourself against a wall. So I rang the bell. The bell has never once cared about my limits. The sound came up inside my skull. My mind went cold and level, and I stayed on that mural. And the stick figure changed the form. It started doing something else, something adjacent, something my hands already half knew and my understanding did not. My body went with it like a puppet with the strings finally attached, and the key in me reversed. All of it. Every circuit I had spent 8 years learning to run one way went backwards through the same road. It hurt in a place that does not have a name. I came out of it 5 or 6 hours later, sitting on stone, with dust in my mouth. New line on the panel. Flawless sword body. Entry, 1 out of 100. The sword seed, by the way, went to Zhen Shan. The position went with it. The whole square cheered for a man who had run past that wall without looking at it. And senior brother Kai, who had supervised my exit, had personally worked on that 8th mural for years and gotten nothing, which I only learned later and which I have never mentioned to him. My master was standing outside the hall when we came out. Ding had been standing there the entire day, not sitting. Ding had counted us out, one at a time. When I came through, he said, "That is the 18th. The last one is Lin Dao," in the tone of a man reading his own sentence. We walked back to the hut. There is an altar in that hut with 6 tablets on it, 6 generations of a lineage that had all died with the same unfinished job. Whatever the outcome, he said, your master can bear it. I looked at the floor and said, "Aye." And he started to comfort me. Ding got about 4 words into comforting me. "Master," I said. In fact, Disciple has already figured out the flawless Vajra skill in the mural. There was a pause you could have parked a cart in. "What did you just say? Say it again." I said it again. "You brat," he shouted on his feet. "How dare you mock your master?" It took 20 minutes to convince him. It took 20 minutes and a demonstration, and eventually the panel description recited out loud, and when he finally believed it, he went and got the wine he had been saving for something. Ding never said what the something was, and I think that night was it. Ding also told me the ancestor's second wish, the one behind the first. The flawless Vajra skill was never the goal. The goal was to open an 8th main peak of the Divine Sword Sect. The mural was the price of admission. I got extremely drunk with a crippled gatekeeper in a hut in a valley, and the next morning, for the first and only time in my life, I slept through the morning bell. I want you to understand how that felt. There is a specific horror that only comes from a progress bar you have not fed. Practicing the flawless sword body was worse than the mural. The reversed circulation tore my meridians every single time. 3 runs was the limit before something inside came apart. The only reason I could do 3 instead of 0 was that the bell was repairing the damage roughly as fast as I was making it. My master watched me do that for a week, went away, and came back with a yuan mai pill that he definitely could not afford. Once the flawless sword body is complete, he said, you are reborn. You break the normal age limits. Around then, Guo Fei came up the hill with news, delivered like a man confessing. I made the rankings. I am at the very end of the list. Ding was so happy. Dead last on a list of 100 out of 10,000 servants, and he was so happy. I have thought about that face more times than I have thought about most of my breakthroughs. Then my master came up the hill with a bundle. I knew before he opened his mouth. Ding gave me every pill he had left and a jar of medicinal wine and told me the moon worship cult had risen in the 8 southeastern prefectures, that he had happened to be selected. Happened to be. A crippled gatekeeper who never asked for anything happened to be selected. His last instruction was one line. Do not take extermination missions. That night, a shadow went past my tower without a sound, high up, heading south. I did not see who. I have wondered since. Then the war ate the mission wall. I want to describe the mission hall in that period because it is the single funniest and most pathetic stretch of my life. Every card on that wall was an extermination job. Every single one. And refusing missions means you starve, and taking one meant going where the cult was. The cult was where people were coming back from in boxes. So every few days, I stood in that hall in a crowd of people my own age, waiting for a non-suicidal card to be turned. Shi Kong found me there and invited me into his team. 4 of us, he said. The odds of completing it as a group are very high. I declined, and then a manager flipped a card on the wall and it was an escort, and 40 people surged at it. I took the token off the hook before the front row finished moving. Holy crap, someone said. Who stole it? That is some serious hand speed, said someone else. And Shi Kong, who I had turned down about 11 minutes earlier, said loudly to his friends, this person is truly a coward. I want that quote preserved. Shi Kang, on the record, in a public hall, the year I was quietly working on a technique that had defeated 6 generations of swordsmen. The escort was 500 points. The client was a woman named Lin Yun, wife of an inner disciple. Her daughter Yun Wen, who was about 8 and who conducted the following interview from the window of the carriage. Big brother, what is your cultivation level? Xiaowen, do not pry into people's private matters. But he looks young. Big brother, how old are you? Big brother, do you have a sword? Big brother, why does your horse walk in front? Longest 10 days of my life. Best client I ever had. Their destination was Ye City, which is the Iron Country, all forges and slag heaps and men with burned forearms. The Lin family had gone downhill, and the old father had decided to move everyone to Fuyang. Ding made this decision over dinner in front of me, in the phrase your brother is not very capable, which the brother had to eat with rice, so the return trip was 2 carts instead of 1. I told them the truth up front, in plain words. My contract covers this woman and this child. The rest of you I will help if I can, and I am not promising anything. You get exactly 1 honest sentence like that per job. Spend it early. 3 days in, we hit a town that was on fire, not burning, celebrating. A torch festival, the whole place lit up brighter than noon, and down the main street came a procession that made the hair on my arms stand up. Dozens of men stripped to the waist carrying a throne on their shoulders, and on the throne an old man in scarlet with red hair, and around him dancers in demon masks breathing fire into the sky, and on both sides the entire population screaming themselves hoarse in a way that had nothing to do with joy. I could feel the old man, master level, and I could feel 4 or 5 more hidden in that crowd, burning like candles in a dark room. Then a woman across the street looked at me, and I recognized her from the true disciple selection. I turned the carts around and took the whole convoy out of that town at night, over the objections of everyone, including an 8-year-old who wanted to see the fire dancers. I found out afterward what the objection cost. Zikang's team was on a balcony above that street at the same hour, watching the same procession. This moon worship cult is truly everywhere, one of them said, even inside a local fire worship monastery, and one of them suggested calling me in since I was apparently in the area. Adding another person just means another share of the points, said Zikang. Besides, are you not worried he will hold us back? We camped that night by a village called Wu-Tang, dogs barking. I was dozing in a tree over the carts, which is a habit I recommend. Something came across the fields at a dead run, on all 4s part of the time, and it was the red-haired man from the throne. Ding was not on a throne anymore. Ding was being hunted. His robe was in strips and he was heading for a camp full of sleeping people because sleeping people are food and he needed blood. I came down out of that tree like an owl and cut him. The sword went in about the width of a hair and stopped. A blood-red light came up off his skin and threw my blade back. I had a very fast and unpleasant thought about the actual gap between a master and me, so I used the secret technique for the first time. Myriad Transformation's Sword Chi does not use my QE. It reaches out and takes the origin key of the world and folds it into an edge, and what came off my sword was 10 feet long and did not care what he had on. First, he said, innate. Then he turned to run, and I cut him down while he was running. It took the whole thing, both halves of a technique and half my ki, and I sat down in a wheat field with my ears ringing. On what was left of him, there was a leather booklet, opened up by my own edge, blood transformation and star absorption technique. Drink blood, turn it into ki, plus 2 attachments, a blood-burning art, and a soul-severing finger. That is the technique that had made a man into that. That is the thing the cult hands out. In the morning, the town was empty of everybody who could walk. Si Kong's team came through covered in other people's evening. Their report was that they had cleared the monastery and lost the abbot, a half-step innate, which made the mission a failure. Then a runner brought word that a body had been found outside Wutong. Good heavens, one of them said, standing over it. Was this wildfire man cleaved in two with a single stroke? Do you think, said Shu Yuan slowly, it could be that Lin Dao? And they all looked at each other and had a small laugh. The official conclusion was that a wounded man had been finished off by persons unknown. The mission was upgraded from failure to perfectly executed. I came home 20 days later to a house with a pheasant living in it and every hourglass on the shelf run dry. I fixed the time. I rang the bell. There is a sentence I have thought about often, and it is not one of mine. Somebody wrote it down about that morning, and it got back to me eventually. The sound of the morning bell, absent for more than 20 days, once again rang out among the peaks. Guo Fei came up the hill at a run when he heard it. Ding had been worried because the casualty lists that season had names on them he knew. I checked his temples while he talked. Ding had gotten the Du channel open on his own. Nobody had helped him. The blood technique I burned. I read it 4 times first, obviously, because there was one piece of it worth having, and the piece was not the blood. It was the blood-burning art, which lets you spend your own life essence for a short, enormous surge of power, and which is normally worthless because the consequences are permanent. The consequences are permanent for people who cannot heal. I have a bell that repairs its priest. It took me half a year of failures to rebuild the thing without its parasitic root, 6 months of running a stolen technique wrong in a shed at night, and when it finally caught, it caught like fuel. Secret techniques, myriad transformations, sword chi, blood-burning art. 2 of them now, both of them mine, one of them stolen from a corpse in a field and rebuilt from scratch, and I sat there on the platform at the end of that winter, feeling extremely pleased with my little collection. Then the messenger came up the path to say the sect leader wanted me, and my master was back. I did not run down that hill. I want to be accurate. I flew. Ding was standing in the outer hall with his hands folded, his hair gone white, and his face had the color of paper. Someone said the phrase as if he has aged 20 years. That was not a figure of speech. That was a description. The elders had walked into an ambush. One of them did not come back at all. Elder Zhou's Qi Si is injured, they told me. His martial intent is damaged. Damaged, not spent. Damaged. A martial intent is the thing a man spends 15 years growing out of his own understanding, and his had a crack in it that would not close. It is a good time for me to retire, he said, and smiled at me. I took him up the mountain that day. I did not ask the hall. I did not file anything. I put my master on my back, up the last of the path, and installed him in the second room of a shed on the bell tower, and he complained about the mattress for 11 years. Then he went to the sect leader and asked for something no elder had ever asked for. Ding asked to buy me out of my missions. Several years of exemption, paid for with his own contribution points, which were all he had left. They gave him 5 years. Ding told me the rest of it on the platform one night, sitting on my step with a cup he was not supposed to have. His mother died when he was small. His father was a merchant who wanted a merchant. Ding ran off to be a knight-errant instead, the way boys do, and spent 6 years as somebody's servant, and eventually his father found him and bought him resources instead of dragging him home quietly for years, while telling him he was a disgrace to his face. Then they had a fight about it, a real one. The money stopped. A year after that fight, someone framed the family, and his father and every relative he had went into a prison and stayed there until they were gone. I used to hate my father, he said. In the end, I understood he was the most important person in my heart. Ding took revenge. Ding took it thoroughly, and it took him 3 years, and he did it with no resources at all, on nothing but hatred. It is how he opened both the Ren and Du channels and drove his fist to perfection, and none of it brought a single one of them back. If there is anyone in this world who cares about you, he said, it will be family. Then he coughed into his sleeve, and there was blood in it. Ding changed the subject to vegetables. I want to be honest about the next 3 months. They were the happiest of my life to that point, and almost nothing happened in them. I nursed a crippled innate back to something like stable. The bell did the actual work, quietly, every morning. The elders who came up to visit went away puzzled by the pace of his recovery, and the sect leader remarked on it twice. My master got bored inside 11 days and started teaching Guo Fei, who was still a servant and who nearly fell off the mountain when a retired elder of the Divine Sword Sect corrected his stance. I think my master saw a version of himself in him. Same log, same stubbornness, same complete absence of anybody willing to help. Meals were 3 of us at a plank table. Porridge, pork with horseradish, stewed chicken, greens, because Master Tang An loves to eat. I have to tell you about the 3rd chair. Guo Fei was still a servant. Ding had been carrying a log for 4 years, and he had opened one channel by himself. Ding had never in his life sat down at a table with an elder of the Divine Sword Sect, and there was no arrangement of words in the world that would get him to do it voluntarily. The first time, he stood by the door with his hands behind his back and said he had already eaten. The second time, he said he would eat after. The 3rd time, my master, who does not raise his voice for anything, said, "Sit down or get out," and Guo Fei sat down so fast the bench moved. Then he ate about 4 grains of rice for an hour. It took a full month of him coming up the hill to have his stance corrected, then trying to leave before the food came out, and my master pretending not to notice, and me putting more in his bowl while he was looking somewhere else. And then one evening, he reached across the table for the pork without being asked. My master's eyes went sideways to me for about a quarter of a second, and neither of us said anything at all. That was the year. 2 men and a boy at a plank table on a hill nobody visits, eating too much and arguing about horseradish. I have been in a battle where 1,000,000 men were on the field. I would give it back for one more of those. That is also the season I read a book that changed the size of my head. Records of Mountains and Rivers. The Great Chang holds 83 prefectures and is governed by 3 powers that hate each other: the imperial court, the princes, and the schools. And the land itself is called the Yangjiao region because the shape of it resembles a giant ram's horn. I sat on a platform on one hill in one prefecture of 83 and thought, the world is very large, and someday I am going to go out and look at it. I did not go for another 9 years. I had a bell. We built my master a house that spring. Ding decided he wanted a retirement cottage rather than the second room of my shed, which was fair, and Guo Fei and I built it. The timber phase went quickly because I felled trees with one stroke of a sword, and Guo Fei carried them. I want you to know he never once asked why we did not simply use an axe. Then the Lin family steward came up my hill again and got on his knees in the dirt. "Young master, I have finally met you." Ding had my father's words and a second box. I took the box without opening it, which surprised him. I have never been sentimental about that family, but I stepped into this life wearing somebody else's name and somebody else's face, and if I take the identity, I take the debts attached to it, all of them, in both directions. That is not warmth. That is bookkeeping. I just could not always tell the difference by then. Then I broke my own rule about not interfering. It is the best thing I ever did with a bottle of pills. Guo Fei was at the bottom of the rankings. Ding had been there for a year and a half. I tossed him a bottle with 3 qi and blood pills in it. Ding tried to give them back. "If we are told to take it," I said, "we take it. You do not want to be a utility disciple forever, do you?" His lips went. Ding did not say anything. Ding took the bottle. Ding opened his Ren channel that month. Then he did something I did not plan for and could not have. Ding went from the last name on that list to the first. 10,000 servants watched a man from the night chamber climb the entire ladder in one season, and down in the errand hall, Shu Jian told his deacons in a low voice that it was related to the person above and glanced up the mountain. "Work hard," I told him. "Hold first place 3 years running." Summer came and I woke up one morning able to feel every cell in my body cheering. I had been sitting on the illusory grade of my sword intent for years. That morning it came out of me and stood next to the shadow of the bell in my mind, and instead of a feeling it was a thing, a knot of sword chi hanging in the air over my hand, visible, with weight. Heartless sword intent, illusion grade. That is a master's level of intent. I was not innate. I was not close to innate. I had the intent of a man 2 whole realms above me, which is exactly the kind of imbalance that gets a person killed, and which was about to become the biggest problem I had, because after that, everything stopped. 2 years. I am going to say that again, because it is the part that nobody puts in these stories. 2 years of nothing. The flawless sword body sat at 99 out of 100 for 8 months without moving. The war widened, the missions got more expensive and more fatal. There was a rumor that the annual requirement would become 2, and Guo Fei made inner disciple. I did not go to the ceremony because I could not stand the idea of being congratulated. There was nobody to ask. The flawless Vajra skill is a thing the entire Divine Sword Sect does not possess. My own master had never seen it work. The only man who had ever completed it had been dead for 600 years and had left me a scribble on a wall. And in the end, the answer was not a technique. It was a suspicion I had been avoiding for 2 years. Could it be that my sword intent grew too fast? The body was flawless. The intent was above it. The intent was standing on the roof shouting at a house that had not finished being built. The house had finished, and nobody had told the intent it could come down. There was a full moon that night. I went out to the middle of the platform and I let the shadow of the sword fall. It came down out of the air and went into my dantian. I ran the flawless sword body and my intent dissolved, deliberately, everything I had grown over 11 years, unmade, into the body it had come from. Then the body went through its limit. My hair fell out and grew back. My skin went over like glaze on fired clay. Every part of me came apart at a level below anything I had a name for and reassembled with nothing left in it that should not be there. The whole time there was one feeling underneath all of it, and it was not power. It was freedom. I broke into the innate realm on the way up. Not through a door, through the roof, and the moonlight over that platform gathered into something like a slow sea and poured down onto a hill in the middle of nowhere, on a bell tower, on a man who had been a servant 9 years earlier. I found a bronze mirror afterward. Same face, exactly the same face, but the material of it had changed, the way a copy and an original are the same picture. And down at the bottom of the path, in bare feet, in the middle of the night, stood my master. Ding could not raise a tenth of his own chi anymore. Ding had still felt the origin key of the world bending toward my hill. Ding had run out of his house without shoes and then stopped at the tree line. Ding did not come up. Ding was afraid of interrupting it. I think he was more afraid of coming up and finding out it had failed. Disciple, I said, suddenly mastered the flawless sword body technique. Ding said, okay. Then he said, okay again. Then he said, okay a third time and had to sit down on a rock. Then he took hold of my sleeve and gave me the only order he ever gave me in that voice. Regarding the perfect innate matter, absolutely no third person must know. Not one. Because no power in this world tolerates the existence of a perfect innate, not out of fear of what you are, out of certainty about what you will become. Then he laid out the ladder above me, which I had never bothered to learn because it had never been relevant. Innate has 5 steps: true key, true essence, true core, which buys you 200 years. Celestial being, which is when a man flies, 300 years, and martial saint, which is 500 and up, and which almost nobody alive has ever seen. My master had reached the beginning of true core before the ambush, and somewhere in this sect possibly, there was still a sword envoy at the celestial stage who had gone missing decades ago and had never been confirmed dead. The change in speed after that was obscene. 1 practice session, 1 point. The limit was no longer my body. My body did not have a limit anymore. The limit was my spirit, and my spirit could take 5 sessions a day, and then it was done. There were side benefits I noticed by accident. A flawless body pushes out the toxin load of medicinal pills instantly, which means I could eat pills at a rate that would cripple anyone else, and which means I was, from that night on, effectively impossible to poison. The 5-year exemption ran out 3 months later. I picked up a new sword art on the way through that period and drilled it because it suited me, the soul-chasing sword technique, built on speed, precision, cruelty, the destruction of the spirit, which are 4 words I would like to distance myself from and cannot. Then the middle stage arrived and 2 strands of innate chi in me braided into a double helix, and the field they made started dragging origin chi in out of the air on its own, and the strike doubled. I tested it on a bird 100 meters away, which I regret, mostly. News came up the hill with my master every few days, and none of it was good in the long run. The rebellion was almost put down. The next true disciple selection was being prepared, and my master, on his knees in the vegetable bed with dirt to the elbow, said the sentence that turned out to be the entire next decade. Although the moon worship cult rebellion is almost quelled, I am afraid there will be even more trouble in the future, because the cult had not risen on its own. Behind it stood the court and the princes and the schools, all 3, each of them using it to bleed the other 2. The Great Chang was going over. Everyone with a map could see it. Nobody with a map was going to say it out loud. Then the missions came back, and the first card I pulled was a monster. An earth dragon insect had gotten into the Ziwu mine. 5,000 contribution points to kill it, 20,000 to bring it in alive. I rode a medicinal horse on a horse riding pill and did 10 days in one, day and night, which is a thing I would not recommend to the horse. The mine had tens of thousands of workers and had been shut for half a month. The thing had eaten dozens of people in that time, and every day of the shutdown cost more than the reward. The manager was a man named Ding who summed up his position for me without being asked. Those lowly miners died, and that was that. There was also a house expert, 9th rank, Ling Xingfeng, who had spent his life saving toward an innate pill, and who looked at the young man in gray robes they had sent, and did not bother hiding his face. They offered me a banquet. I said the sooner the problem is solved, the sooner the mine reopens, which they liked, and which was true, and which was not the reason. The reason was that I had a bell to get back to. I memorized the map of the shafts before I went down, because the thing that scared me in that mine was not the insect, it was the roof. Then I borrowed a miner named Zhang Liao, who could smell it, genuinely. Ding could not describe it, and he was never wrong, and 3 volunteers as bait, who were paid extremely well, and who did in fact run at the right moment, which is more than most professionals manage. Then I shut off my presence and stood in a tunnel like a piece of the wall. It came up out of the floor, a black column in coils, ringed with steel bristles, a mouth that opened in rings of teeth, thicker than a barrel. It took the front baitman's lamp and part of the ceiling with it. The miners ran. It retracted instantly, which is what it always did, which is why nobody had killed it. I did not strike the part I could see. I put illusion-grade intent through the rock, threw it, down into the ground, and it caught all 10 meters of that thing while it was still moving and pinned it in the dirt like a specimen. Then I put the sword down through the stone floor, and the stone floor was tofu. In the dark inside it there was a stone the size of a dragon's eye, giving off an energy that did not belong to anything I had ever felt. My body would not absorb it. My body actively refused, which was interesting enough that I wrapped it in cloth instead of leaving it. Then I hauled both halves of a 10-meter insect up a mine shaft with one hand in front of the manager and the 9th rank house expert. And there was a period of silence in that yard. They offered the banquet again. I said no again. Going back to ring the bell and cultivate is the true path, which they took as a monkish humility, and which was the single most literal sentence I have ever said to a stranger. I rode out that night, and about 40 miles on, I saw a village burning. I had passed that village on the way in. There had been children playing on the road, and one of them had thrown a stone at my horse. 200 and something people, all of them, not a fight, an erasure, and it had happened inside the hour. There was nothing at all to do. I stood in that street for a while, then said the only true thing available, which was that without strength we are all powerless against this, and got back on the horse feeling like a coward for the 2nd time that year, and meaning it this time. I was a quarter mile down the road when I heard water. Not water, a splash, and then a very small sound. There was a well behind the last house, and about 15 feet down, floating on their back on the surface, was a child of 5 or 6, and they were not screaming. That is the part I did not expect. They were making a small noise every few breaths, like a person who had already tried screaming and learned it did not work. I went down the well. I brought the child up, put chi into them, and shaved a crumb off a pill into their mouth, and got no reaction of any kind. The eyes were open. The eyes did not have anybody behind them. I took the child to the nearest town and tried to hand them off, and I want to report the exact words I received in 3 different placement agencies because they have stayed with me. You can tell at a glance the child is a bit slow. No one will adopt. If I were adopting, I would definitely adopt someone smarter. This one is quite good looking, but looks a bit silly. Nobody took the child. I rode home with a 5-year-old on my saddle who had not made a sound in 4 days. My master took one look. This child is not just frightened. There is something wrong in the mind. At dinner, the child ate like an animal with both hands fast, watching the door. When Guo Fei came in, they went behind my legs and shook until he left. Then I showed my master the stone from the mine and watched a man who had been ambushed by 3 innate masters go gray. Have you ever heard of demons? They ate people. That is the whole history. They ate people until martial arts got strong enough to drive them out. Then they were gone, and everyone stopped believing in them the way you stop believing in floods. That black stone is a demon stone. The essence of a dead demon. It infects, it mutates, and given enough time, it turns whoever consumes it into an actual demon, and dealing with an actual demon requires a celestial being at minimum, and then, because the world is built the way it is built, he added the second half. However, after cultivating a flawless physical body, one can restrain a demon stone, even absorb the demon essence inside it. Do not touch it yet, he said. Not until you are stronger. I put it in oiled paper, in a box, in the cellar, next to 6,000 tails I had never counted. The child, meanwhile, needed a bath. That is how I found out that the child was a girl. I want the record to show that I had been carrying this kid for 6 days at that point. I put her in my master's bed. When he came near, she shut her eyes and pretended to be asleep, instantly, perfectly, and my master looked at me over the top of her and said, "This one is not particularly stupid." Next morning I broke through to the late stage of true ki with a 3rd strand coming in, right there on the platform, and the sword ki came off me in a ring instead of a wave because she was sitting on the step watching. Then I took her down to Linjin City, bought a house, hired a nurse called Chen Qing, and put money on the table for a year. I ruffled her hair on the way out. I said something cheerful. I got to the gate, and behind me, for the first time in 9 days, that empty face came apart completely. She came off the steps screaming and crying and ran after me down the street. She caught me at the corner and got both hands into my robe and would not let go. The tears were coming down a face that still was not doing anything, which is a combination I hope you never have to look at. Chen Xing got there out of breath and explained it to me like a professional. The young miss has had a great shock. That is why she attaches like this. I looked after a boy from a wealthy house who was the same. Ding would only listen to the people he trusted, and he was terrified of everyone else. I pressed a point on the side of her neck and she went to sleep against the woman's shoulder mid-sob, which is a trick I am not proud of and used maybe 9 times over the next 10 years. My master's assessment when I got home was brisk. She cannot take care of herself. She is a burden. Then he immediately said the sword tomb was opening again, and this time I could go. The tower went quiet after that in a way I had not had in years. 1 point of progress every 3 days, less than a year to true essence. Guofei came up to drag me to the true disciple selection as a spectator. I told him what is so interesting about it. It is not as if I have never been in one. That is the single most obnoxious sentence in this entire account. Ding asked what was actually inside the sword sharpening cave. Some murals, I said. Nothing special. Then I made him stay for breakfast, because I am not a monster. Then my master came up with a problem. It was the funniest problem I ever had. The sect leader has been getting complaints. The hour bell is silent too often. They are assigning you a servant. I heard that and had a genuine internal crisis. This is my bell. How can I let just anyone bump into it? But I could not say that out loud to a man who thought I was a disciplined ascetic. So I went down to the errand hall myself to pick. I gave Xu Jian a specification that I now realize was the specification of a man choosing a pet. Honest, reliable, male. Preferably someone who has only been here a year. New ones are easier to train. I said that out loud in a hall. Nobody found it strange. What I did not know is what my name had become down there. Xu Jian called an emergency meeting of his deacons after I left and told them that if any of them offended that person, none of them would get away with it. Ding then banned servants from going up my mountain without cause. And meanwhile, the servants themselves had built the legend from the other end because a man from the night chamber had gone from last on the rankings to first in 1 season. Everybody knew where he went for dinner. 5 years earlier, a dog would not have taken the bell tower posting. Now it was a rumor with a queue. They lined up 5 boys in front of me, all shaking. I pointed at the thin dark one, him, Zhenming, 16, terrified, and in the crowd at the back of the 100 Herbs garden that day, watching a boy get pulled out of the line and sent up a mountain, Wang Meilin stood biting her lip. The boy from years ago was now somebody she could not reach. If she had been a little braver back then, her whole life would have gone another way. I did not see her. I heard about it much later from a woman who had made her peace with it. Zhenming's duties were as follows. Strike the bell only when I am away. Watch the glasses. Cook. Clean. Ding asked me privately, much later, why he was not allowed to strike it when I was there. I told him it was tradition. Ding accepted that because he was 16 and I was a legend. I want to note that a strike I did not make with my own hands was worth exactly nothing to the system, and every day Zhenming rang that bell for me was a day of my life crossed out, which is why I came home from every mission at a dead gallop for the next 20 years, and why my master thought I was devoted, and why I never corrected him. The first evening Zhenming watched me practice and told me later that every hair on his body stood up, as if the air were full of invisible needles. Then at dinner, I told him to take some porridge, and he took a spoonful. When he looked into the pot and saw the pieces of exotic beast meat in it, he nearly cried into it. Ding had heard the servants talk about opportunity for 4 years. Ding had assumed it was a story. The Sword Tomb Road went out from behind the Divine Sword Hall along a cliff over a gorge thousands of feet deep, in fog in single file for 10 minutes, with the sky going gray overhead the whole way. 20 of us. Zikang said hello. Nobody else recognized me, because in a sect this size a new crop of talents comes up every year and last year's names go into a drawer. Our guide was a sword envoy, in a black iron mask, who said 1 sentence. This seat guards the sword tomb. Follow me. There is a stele where the path ends. Sword tomb. Sacred ground. Mortals keep out. 4 characters that physically hurt to look at, which was my first hint that the writer had been serious. We stepped down, and I stopped breathing for a second. There were swords in the air. Thousands of them, a forest of blades hanging in nothing, going up out of sight, and in the middle of it, a sword of stone 100 fathoms high, riddled with holes like a honeycomb, and around its base a field of steles carved with the lives of people who had died a very long time ago, and every one of my 20 companions was gone. The space had folded them somewhere else. I sat down and let my intent out. The nearest hanging sword folded itself into a human shape and attacked me. That is the sword tomb. That is the whole thing. Every intent in that place is somebody's leftover, and the moment you show yours, they line up. One dissolves, and the next one is already there. A grand one, all width and pressure. A soft one that came in from angles I could not see until it was on me. One like a falling mountain, one that I never actually saw at all. I lasted longer than any of them expected, because when my spirit started to fail, I rang the bell, and the bell said no. In the end, it still took me apart and put me on the ground. I have never been so tired. I could not lift my hand. I lay on stone in a place that does not exist, and looked up at a forest of swords and thought, in a completely calm voice, well, that was worth it. Then I read the panel. Heartless sword intent. Illusion grade. 99 out of 100. It had been 23 when I walked in. 23 to 99. My master's estimate for that distance, when he was healthy and working at it full time, had been over a decade. I did it in an afternoon by being beaten up by ghosts. And then more than a dozen swords came down out of the forest and hung around me in a circle. The ones I had fought, the ones whose intents had been in my head, and who apparently, having lost, considered the matter settled in a way I did not fully follow. One of them was so thin it was almost transparent, like the wing of a cicada. It had a name on the tang, Chung Ying. Every part of me wanted it. I took the ugly one instead. It was a plain blade with a dull surface and 3 characters on it, Sword 18, and I took it because when I put my intent against it, the intent did not have to bend. It was already the same shape, heartless. Sword 18 then. I choose you. It came into my hand, and the entire circle of divine swords went back up into the sky at once. Then I made a mistake. A wonderful mistake. I sent my intent into the blade to introduce myself, the way you would. The shadow of that intent came out of my forehead and poured into the sword, and the entire forest started to hum. Thousands of swords, all of them, moving in waves like a field of grain in wind, and the sound of it went through the whole space. My intent kept pouring out of me and would not stop. Heartless sword intent, true image grade, true image, the grade at which intent stops being a feeling and starts affecting the physical world. There are 3 men in the entire Divine Sword Sect who might have it, and none of them do. I pulled it back in as fast as I could, and the forest went still. Then the space broke like a mirror, and all those swords flew home into the holes of the stone sword and left it standing there like a hedgehog. Outside, Si Kang took one look at what was in my hand, and his face did something complicated. Junior brother Lin, you actually matched with a divine sword? Even the coward got one. Ding did not say that part. Ding is a good man. Ding thought it very loudly. Up on the ledge above, the sword envoys were counting. 5 matches this time. Last time, there were none. Whose disciple is that on the right? Why have I never heard of him? I hear he is Zhou Laogi's disciple. Psst. That old ghost finally got his wish. Because Sword 18 had belonged to the founding ancestor of my master's lineage. It had been hanging in that air unclaimed for 600 years. The elders waiting outside the hall were doing what elders do, which is measure each other with other people's children. Someone told Fat Ding that his disciple had become a true disciple. Ding was still saying some hope, and then I walked out with a divine sword. My master's face did something I had never seen it do, which is that the smile got away from him. Ding could not get his mouth closed. Zhou Laogui, said the fat one sourly. Your disciple has good luck. Said my master. That night in the hut, he held Sword 18 across both palms like a man holding a baby and told me about the 5 grades of martial intent. Illusory, phantom, true image, heavenly phenomenon, myriad. At true image, he said, the blade can be melted into the body itself. Nobody in the Divine Sword Sect has ever achieved it. I sat there and said nothing, because I had gotten to true image that afternoon, and because there is no explanation for that speed that ends with me continuing to live on a hill in peace. Comprehension only covers so much. Past a certain point, comprehension starts to look like a story somebody is telling. So I fed the sword at night instead, quietly, alone, and my cultivation went from a point every 10 days to a point every 2. I went down to Linjin City that month to check on the girl and found Chen Qing with black circles under her eyes. The young lady is too difficult. She sleeps very little. She cries for no reason. She throws things and breaks them. Sometimes she runs out into the street in the middle of the night. I doubled her wages and bought 2 more maids. Then I dissolved a grain of a spirit-nurturing pill in warm water and got the girl to drink it and put her out with the neck trick and looked at her while she slept. She was clean. Her hair was brushed. She was rounder than when I found her. That old woman had been earning every copper and complaining about it, which is the only kind of person worth hiring. Around then, I found out something useful by accident. I finished the soul-chasing sword technique, drove it to perfection, and the moment I did, my sword intent jumped 3 points. 3. It normally moved 1 point every 6 weeks, so a completed technique becomes food for the intent that sits above it. I took that to my master, extremely pleased with myself, and he punctured it in 1 sentence. In theory, yes. In practice, once your own comprehended sword intent is in the way, perfecting a second sword art becomes extremely, extremely difficult. Ding was right. I tried a third art for a year and got nowhere. Some doors only open once. The Lin family steward came up my hill again that spring, and this time I lifted him off the path with a hand I did not move and set him on the platform, mostly to save him the climb. Come in with me. Ding had aged. Ding told me my father was in good health, that he had gone to pay respects at my mother's grave a while back, and that he really misses you, young master, and he said that last part looking at the floor because he had been instructed to say it. I sat with that for a while. This body's mother died when it was 5 or 6. The memories are not mine, but they are in here, and they are warm. There are not many of them, and every one of them is her. I wrote a note. Then I put the entire stack of gold notes back in the box, added 2 bottles, chi and blood pills and spirit nurturing pills, the kind of thing that cannot be bought outside a sect at any price by anyone at all. And I wrote one more line at the bottom. Remember, do not give it to that woman. The steward got intercepted at the gate on the way in, obviously. My stepmother wanted the inventory. Ding told her that was all. It was the first time in 30 years of service that he had lied to her face, and I like to think he enjoyed it. My father read the note, and then he read the last line. Then he sat in that room for a long time without saying anything to anyone. I broke through to true essence in the rain, 40 miles from the sect, at night, because breakthroughs make noise, and my mountain had a servant on it now. 4 strands of liquid ki, the 4-phase field. It went perfectly, and then, about a second after it finished, something enormous came at me across the sky. I ran. Hey, why are you running? I kept running. It seems you are not one of my Divine Sword Sect. Stay here for me. Sword chi came down out of the clouds. It was not the kind of sword chi I had ever been on the receiving end of. So I used my favorite invention. I had built it a year earlier out of pure spite for exactly this situation. A bell, made out of sword chi, closed over me like a lid, and here's the elegant part. It reads as a true image intent construct and nothing else. Nothing about it says system. Nothing about it says vessel. Nothing about it says a servant on a hill has a cheat. The strike came down and the bell rang and every bush inside 40 feet lay down flat. And I was fine. And then I rang it back. The bell went off inside his head from underneath, and a celestial being nearly fell out of the sky, and by the time he had reassembled himself, I was gone, and had been gone for some time. I got a description later. Bald, white beard, hemp robe, and a sword on his back the size of a door. And I got the quote, because he said it out loud in front of a courtyard of very senior people, and it went around the sect like a fire. Goodness. That was a true image-grade sword intent. And it seems that intent can turn into a bell sound and attack my mental consciousness from a distance. Then he pulled about a dozen of his own white hairs out in frustration. I will now describe the next 4 days of my life, which I spent on a hill, ringing a bell, while the entire Divine Sword Sect looked for me. The sect leader bowed to that old man, because that old man turned out to be the Grand Uncle Master, head of the 5 sword envoys, and the one and only celestial being the Divine Sword Sect had. They questioned everybody. 7 peak masters, 4 envoys, 32 elders. Not one of them had a true image intent. Not one of them was even close. Although I am old, said the Grand Uncle Master to a hall of people who were being extremely careful with their faces, my mind is still sharp. How could that person have escaped from my grasp? Then he came to my mountain. Ding was asleep on a pavilion roof at dawn when my morning strike went off across the peaks. It woke him up, and he sat there frowning at the sound. Somewhat similar, yet somehow different. Then he flew over and sat in a tree above my platform and watched me. I felt him land. I want that understood. I felt a celestial being settle into a tree 70 feet away. What I did was let the bell drop my apparent cultivation to the bottom of the innate ladder. Then I went out and did some slow, lazy, mediocre sword forms in the yard, like a man with nowhere to be. He said to himself in a tree. His swordsmanship is not bad. Whose disciple is he? Then he saw my master come out of the cottage. His whole mood changed, and he left. I never expected that after all these years away, this brat would actually find a suitable disciple. 3 days later, the sect held a selection in the Divine Sword Hall because he was taking one outstanding young disciple with him to the capital for the Grand Empress Dowager's 200th birthday. 3 of us had divine swords. We were lined up. Ding walked down the line. The one in the middle is too arrogant. Then he stopped in front of me. I looked at the floor and thought about hourglasses. The one on the right also lacks arrogance, but he lacks confidence too, and he has no fighting spirit. A pause. Ding seems too lazy. Ding picked Chang Xiaoyao, who was on the left, and who is heart-natured, resilient, and unfazed by honor or disgrace, which is all completely true and which I would like to point out did not save him from anything later. I stood in that line and let out a breath so carefully that nobody in the world could have seen it. It seems I disguised myself quite well. My master came over afterward to console me. Ding was gentle about it. Ding said there would be other chances, that the capital was dangerous anyway, and that he was proud of me regardless. I have rarely worked so hard to look sad. Guofei left that month on a long assignment, 2 or 3 years out in the world, and he came up the hill to say it in person. "Brother," he said, "without your guidance I would not be where I am." I told him not to be sentimental and gave him a bottle of pills and watched him go down the path with a pack on his shoulders and no log. And in the Divine Sword Hall, on the night before he flew to the capital, the Grand Uncle Master gave the sect leadership a briefing that was not repeated outside that room for years. This journey to the Jade Capital will be fraught with great risk. If things go too badly, you must consolidate your power and hold what you have. And then quieter. That one in the palace probably will not last more than a few years. The moon worship cult rebellion was a small test. Nothing more. I heard about that conversation eventually. By then, I had already opened the box in the cellar, because that is the same month I finally took out the demon stone. I want to be clear that I did it exactly as instructed, in the sense that I waited for my body to be finished first and then ignored every other part of the warning. The first grain of demon energy went into me like oil onto a fire. My blood came up boiling. Everything my master had described started happening on schedule. The infection, the pressure, the pull towards something that wanted a different shape, and the flawless body took it apart and ate it. My blood came out the other side thicker, heavier, and with gold in it. Actual gold, running under the red. No mutation, no corruption, just fuel. Flawless sword body had become immaculate saint body, entry 1 out of 100. I tested it once and only once, out on the platform at night, a single sword hand strike into empty air. A pale gold wave came off my arm, tore the air open and burst like a firework, and the temperature on that platform went up by a lot. Zhen Ming came out of the shed barefoot in his underclothes. "Senior brother Lin, what happened?" "Nothing," I said. "Go to sleep." And he went back to sleep. Ding explained his reasoning to me years later. It was that with senior brother Lin around, if the house collapsed, senior brother Lin would hold it up. That was the entire thought. Ding put his head down on the pillow and went out like a candle. My master arrived at a run about 4 minutes later and was harder to reassure. There was a side effect. The demon energy made me irritable in a way I could feel from the inside, a low, constant readiness to do something unforgivable over nothing, and the morning bell washed it out every single day like rinsing a pot. "I will find you a medicinal pill to calm the mind," my master said, and went away worried. I sat on the step with gold moving under my skin and did the arithmetic he could not do because he did not know what my body was. If this keeps going, celestial being is not the ceiling, martial saint is not even the ceiling, and I have a rock the size of a fist and no idea where to get another one. Chang Xiaoyao came back from the Jade Capital a different person and not in the way anyone hoped. Ding gave his report in the hall and I was not there, but the phrase got repeated so many times that season it became a joke. Junior originally thought he was one of the most outstanding of the younger generation in the Divine Sword Sect. At that birthday banquet, he felt like a frog in a well. Ding had seen the son of the martial emperor, comprehended a martial intent at 13, innate at 15, true essence by 23, and then the court did what the court does. It offered Chang Xiaoyao a place in the Royal Divine Martial Academy, and he took it because who would not? That is precisely how the throne buys the loyalty of every school and prince in the empire, one promising boy at a time. My second mandatory mission of that year was an extermination job. There was no way around it, and I want you to know I looked for one. A gang had massacred the head of a local school in Taiping County. High points, few clues, and among the killers the analysts suspected an innate because the man they had killed was half a step from innate himself and had not lasted. Taiping County is a poor, hard, vertical place, all mountains and thin soil and men who solve problems permanently. 1,000 years ago, the Taiping sect rose out of that county and pulled down the Great Wu dynasty, and after the Great Chang won, they moved populations around like furniture to tear the root out. The county has hated the capital ever since with an enthusiasm that gets passed down like a trade. Outside the city walls, there were refugee shanties going on for miles. I want to be specific because I had been traveling for 11 years by then, and I had never seen it anywhere else. Not a camp, not a slum. A second city, made of mats and sailcloth and salvaged doors, laid out along the road for the better part of an hour's ride, with its own lanes and its own market and children who did not look up when a horse went past. Inside the walls there was a tea house with a lacquered sign and a man out front turning away anybody without a token. Nobody in that city looked at the other one, not with contempt. They did not look at it at all, the way you do not look at a wall. I asked the innkeeper about it and he told me cheerfully that they come down from the hills every year and there is nothing to be done, and then he asked whether I wanted the room with the window. The local branch was called the Taiping Divine Sword Mansion. When I walked in, 3 disciples who had been drinking at a table came up out of their chairs like the furniture had caught fire because the Divine Sword Sect had arrived. They were the Divine Sword Sect and they knew exactly how that sentence worked. The scene was in Sani Town, the Xia estate, lit up like a festival, and the smell in that courtyard was old. They had killed the patriarch, Xia Yuan, formerly of our sect, half a step from innate. Then they had killed the other 177 people who lived there. Nobody had moved anything. The local commander of the Xuanjian division was a man named Xu Guang, who had clearly not slept in a week. This group comes and goes like the wind, he said. They always leave before we find their location. Ding did not say the second half of that sentence out loud, which is that a group that always leaves first has been told when to leave. And then the head of the local branch came out to greet me, and it was Wu Tian. 11 years since he put a finger sword into my back on my own steps. Ding had a nice robe now and a small territory and a face that did something involuntary when he recognized me. Greetings, senior brother Lin. Brother Wu, I said. It has been a long time. I want to be clear. I did not hold a grudge. I had beaten him in front of his own ambition, which had cost him 18 years of a career. There is nothing left to collect after that. I simply enjoyed the 4 seconds. Then I went to work. I walked the estate and read the strikes and got a number that Xu Guang had not gotten because Xu Guang counted wounds and I counted intents. 5. There were 5 killers, and at the last one, standing over an old man who had been half a step from innate, I caught something in the air that I recognized. It took me a moment to place it. The last time I had felt that, it had been coming off a rock in my cellar. That night, I went out alone into the town and let my senses drift, and I found them by smell. Blood in the air is not a smell in the way you are imagining it. At a certain level of perception, it stops being a smell and starts being particles, individual and countable, drifting off a surface at a rate you can follow backward through still night air the way you would follow a thread. I followed it 4 streets and through a courtyard gate that had been left open. The house was lit. That is what stopped me at the wall. They had not even closed the shutters. There were 3 bodies fixed to the wall of that room, and under them, at the table, 4 men were eating, not hurrying. One of them was complaining about the wine. One of them had his boots off. They had killed the household, put what was left of it up as decoration, then sat down underneath it and had a meal. And the thing I want you to understand about that room is that it was not theater for anybody. There was no audience. Nobody had been meant to see it. That is the moment I stopped thinking of the moon worship cult as a political problem. And on the table between the plates, a thin, sick-looking one laid out 3 pieces of heavy craft paper. I knew that paper. I had held that paper. I had scraped every line off a piece of that paper with a kitchen knife 11 years earlier and been very clever about it. The last map ended up with a Divine Sword Sect utility disciple, the thin one was saying. But that utility disciple is dead and the map is missing. If we cannot get the last one, the 3 we have are useless. How are we going to explain that to the leader? Then he stopped talking and looked at the window. Someone is coming. Come out, I said, from the yard. Ding came to the door with a crooked knife. You have a path to heaven. You refuse to take it, he said, and you insist on forcing your way into hell. 4 of them came out at me with red eyes, their hands forward like claws, and I put all 4 down with what I can only describe as slaps, because at that point in my life that is what it took. The 5th one, the thin sick one, was different. Ding fought properly, and I had to open him from shoulder to hip to end it, and then the wound closed. What a powerful strike, he said, conversationally, straightening up. You must be a true Essence Realm Master. Then he looked up at the sky, and there was no moon that night. Ding said something under his breath about the divine power of the great moon goddess not being available, and then he said a word I had never heard, divine transformation. Ding grew. 2 meters and change, jaw forward, teeth wrong, eyes gone back into the skull and red at the bottom of them, and the hair on him standing out stiff like wire. Behind me, Xu Guang made a noise. Is that a half-demon? Then the half-demon turned around and ran. I want to be honest, that threw me off completely. I chased it out of pure confusion. Behind me, Xu Guang was screaming at his men to call me back, that nobody below Grandmaster fights a half-demon, and Wu Tian was ordering a Black Eagle sent to fetch an elder, which is a 3 or 4 day round trip, and which was, to be fair, the correct decision by the book. It stopped in the hills 8 miles out because it could not shake me, and turned around with its hands open. Why be so aggressive, it said. Do you really want to fight to the death? The fish may die, I said, but the net may not break. One stroke. It went down on all fours with a hole through it where a heart used to be, and even then it did not immediately stop. It looked up at me with a face that had gone back to being mostly a man's. Impossible. How could he be so strong? I did not ask why they had killed 178 people. I have thought about that since, and I do not have a good answer. At the time, the honest state of my mind was that none of this concerns me. I had a mission card in my pocket with a number on it. Ding shrank back into a man on the way down and got one more sentence out. The cult leader will not let you go. In his bag there were 3 maps. I sat in the dark on that hillside with 3 pieces of leather across my knees and put them together in my head with the 4th one, the one I had memorized 11 years ago, and they fit. Of course they fit. 1 complete map. But that raised a question I did not like. If 1 quarter already leads to a place, why does anyone need 4? So I went over them with my fingers, slowly, in the dark. Then, with spiritual sense, and on skin that looked and felt entirely smooth, there were raised lines and pressed lines, a second layer worked into the material, 2 more maps, under the first ones, invisible, and I had taken the 4th piece of a set like that and scraped it with a knife and cut it up and buried it in a hole. I sat on that hillside for a while. This is getting a bit troublesome, I said, to nobody, in a very level voice. I dropped the body out of the sky into the courtyard next to the other 4 and said the ringleader has been executed. This case can be closed. Ding is amazing, said one of the local men. Ding actually killed that half-demon. Wu Tian did not believe a word of it. I could see him building the theory in real time, which was that the half-demon had escaped and senior brother Lin had found a substitute corpse to save face. Ding also cancelled the eagle, and Xu Guang, a local commander with a stack of unsolved massacres and no ambition to fight anything with red eyes, signed the case closed at speed, because why would he take that kind of risk? I rode home and went straight to the crooked tree and the split rock and dug. There was nothing in that hole but black rot, 11 years of rain in a wooden box. I can only blame myself, I said, for being too cautious and too timid back then. That is the sentence I promised you. That is what my cleverness cost. There was one road left, which was to rebuild a map from a memory 11 years old by brute force, 1 candidate line at a time, in my head, at night, for years. I got started. My master came up the path with news while I was still in a foul mood, which did not help. 2 innate disciples died on missions this month. I hear they ran into a half-demon. Another half-demon? Ding stopped walking. What did you say? So I confessed to killing one, and to make it survivable, I opened a window on myself for the first time and let him see the illusion grade of my intent. It worked far too well. Ding was so happy he had to sit down. It had taken him 15 years to reach that grade. Then he told me what a half-demon actually is, and it is worse than I expected. They have not appeared since the Taiping Rebellion at the end of the Great Wu, not once in 1,000 years. And there is a saying in the histories, which he quoted to me on my own doorstep in the sunshine. Whenever half-demons walk, chaos is arriving behind them. There are 2 theories about how you get one. Either a man eats a demon stone and keeps control of the mutation, or the thing is simply the child of a demon and a human, born that way. Then he took my wrist. You used the demon stone. The fact that you possess a flawless body must never be revealed. If it is, you will be taken for one of them. Ding also mentioned, in passing, that he still regretted that I had not gone to the capital, that Chang Xiaoyao was now in the Royal Divine Martial Academy. I made a sympathetic face and thought, in the privacy of my own skull, about the fact that there is no bell in the Royal Divine Martial Academy. That autumn, Zhenming nearly crippled himself in my yard. I came out and he was on his knees mid-form with a hand on his chest and sweat coming off him like rain, and I had him on the ground and 2 fingers into 3 points before I had time to be frightened. Ding coughed up blood and went gray and started breathing again. Do you not understand the principle? I said, that haste makes waste? It was not the training, it was my cooking. The medicinal porridge I had been feeding that boy for 4 years, out of pure carelessness, is calibrated for a body like mine. His channels had silted up with the residue of it. Another month, and he would have been a cripple with beautiful skin. I cut his portions and made him fast 2 days. Ding looked at me like I had taken away his birthday, which, from his position, I had. Meanwhile, the world went on having politics. A gilded invitation arrived from Prince Zhang's mansion for a demon extermination conference. The council argued about it from morning until the candles burned down, in circles, with genuine passion. Either send no one at all, or send the sect leader personally, said one faction, correctly identifying that anything in between is an insult. They voted by show of hands and sent an ordinary elder, which is a refusal with a bow on it, and which everyone in that room knew, and which everyone in the prince's mansion understood immediately. Half a year later, on an unremarkable evening, I put my finger on a point on the map of Taiping County and said, out loud, so this is where it is. 6 years of guessing. I had it. I did not go. I want that on the record too, because it is the single most disciplined thing I ever did. I had the location of an innate master's entire estate. I sat on my hands, because the note had said great danger, and because I could not fight a celestial being, and because a man who digs up a treasure he cannot defend has merely arranged his own robbery in advance. Around then, the war we had all been avoiding started, in the stupidest way possible, over a swamp. Our people had tracked a water dragon in Lanxi County, and by the time they got there, someone else had killed it and taken the island in the middle of the marsh where a spiritual jujube tree grows. The someone else was the mystic underworld sect. Has your mystic underworld sect overstepped its bounds? Said Mei Wujing. And they said calmly that at the conference at Prince Jiang's mansion, Lanxi County had been assigned to them. The conference we did not attend, the conference we refused with a bow. Feng Long drew a divine sword and cut a man in black off his feet. Then a man in blue named Guo Rui walked out and tapped the blade with 2 fingers, and Feng Long went 10 paces backward with frost forming on him and his hands shaking. From this moment, said Guo Rui, everything on this island belongs to the mystic underworld sect. The council session about that one was loud. Kai Bo, whose disciple had been the one carried home, put his fist through the table's patience. We must retaliate in kind. Shen Kai, who was smarter and less popular, said if the Divine Sword Sect retaliates in kind, we may be walking straight into what they want. The fat elder said the obvious thing nobody wanted to say, which was that this is not about a swamp, this is Prince Jiang's mansion testing whether we push back. And in the end, Deng Yu, who is the strongest man in the sect below the Celestial and speaks maybe once a session, proposed the answer. Do not fight them for the swamp. Cut the refined iron shipments out of Yi City that go to the mystic underworld sect and to the prince, because the prince was building a private army and armies eat iron. They adopted it and everyone felt clever. It was the correct move, and it also guaranteed the next 8 years of my life. The eagle arrived in the middle of all that. Zhen Ming brought it in from under a tree, a half-fledged black eaglet, thin as a stick and pecked bloody by something bigger. Ding held it out to me at arm's length like a live coal. I had robbed a lot of nests in my previous life, so I knew it could not swallow meat yet. I dissolved a grain of a qi and blood pill in water and dripped it into its beak off a twig, and Zhen Ming stood there watching me feed treasure to a bird with an expression of open, respectful horror. The eaglet came round inside an hour and then ate everything it could see. And then Zikong showed up, because Zikong always showed up when I had just acquired something. Ding needed a 3-leaf purple spirit ginseng. I said no. Ding explained. It is for a gathering life pill. That pill restores the origin key of a man who has burned his out with secret techniques. There are perhaps 2 alchemists in the prefecture who can attempt one, and it needs that ginseng. I said no again. And then Zikong, who is a fool about many things and never about people, said, "Your master is crippled." I did not answer that, so he told me his half. His father had been an elder of the Divine Sword Sect on Wook Peak. 10 years ago, he had taken a serious injury. If the gathering life pill cannot be refined, he probably will not hold on much longer. Then I asked the question I should have asked first. Why me? Because you have the divine sword, he said. That ginseng is not a plant. Only a true image-grade martial intent or a divinely forged weapon can suppress its spirit long enough to dig it out of the ground. Which is when I learned that a 3-leaf purple spirit ginseng runs away. I told him to give me 3 days, and I went to my master's cottage. Ding was thin. Ding was completely white now. Ding was sitting in the sun with a blanket over his knees like an old man, which he was. Ding waved the whole thing off before I finished describing it. Lin Dao, stop thinking about the gathering life pill. Whether I live a few more years or a few less does not matter much. Then he confirmed the other half of the story without being asked, that there had been an elder on Wuku Peak called Si Changming who was crippled 10 years ago. Ding said it in a flat voice, and he went back to looking at his vegetables. I went back down the hill and told Zikong I was in, on one condition, half the pills. The ginseng was in Yuji County, which is Mystic Underworld Sect territory, which is why nobody had dug it up. Ji Kang bought the intelligence at a 1,000-feather pavilion branch, which is a network with offices in more than 20 prefectures. The clerk quoted us a price and then said, in the tone of a man reciting a company motto, that in the intelligence business reputation is the most important thing. Remember that line. It comes back. We went over the ridges at night and came down into a narrow valley at dawn with a waterfall at the head of it, and in a crack in the rock there was a thing about a foot high with 3 leaves on it. I came off the cliff and put sword 18 into the ground next to it. The wave of intent went through the soil and pinned it, and it squealed, out loud. Like a rat. Zikong cut the rock apart and hauled it out, and what came out of that stone was a long purple root covered in little grasping legs, with the stem and the 3 leaves growing out of what I am going to call the tail. Ding was delighted. I was not delighted. I had spent 8 years assuming plants stay where they are put. Riders from the mystic underworld sect went past us on the road that afternoon, and Zikong decided to go into a roadside inn and listen, and before he went, he handed me the bag with the ginseng in it and walked off without a backward glance. Were they not afraid I would simply take it and leave? Apparently not. I have thought about that more than he knows. Then, sitting on a rock on an empty road with somebody else's fortune in my lap, I noticed I was being watched. Not less than Grandmaster, and I could not find them. My spiritual sense went out and came back with nothing, twice, and a man who can hide from that at close range is not a scout. A pebble came out of the tree line, I cut it out of the air, and a figure walked into the road. Black cloak with the hood up, mask, a saber. And in my perception the person flickered, present, absent, present, which is not a skill, that is equipment. That cloak was divinely forged. You took something from this sect, he said. It is time to return it. Then, before anything else, he took the cloak off, folded it, and put it carefully in a bag. I want you to appreciate that. Ding was about to fight a stranger. The first thing he did was protect the coat. That told me more about the coat than anything he could have said. His saber made snow, light coming off the edge and flakes drifting, and the flakes did not cut skin. They went past skin and cut at the spirit underneath. It hurt in a way that has no location. I rang the bell once inside my own head, and the pain simply stopped existing. Then one stroke of sword 18, and we passed each other. I put the sword back in the scabbard. "Ha," he said. Ding got that far. Then he went down with a hole through his chest. Not a half-demon. A top grandmaster is nothing more than this. I took the cloak and the saber. The cloak gives total concealment to anyone wearing it, which is the single most useful object I have ever owned. The reason a great many people are alive who should not be, and a great many others are dead who thought they were safe. The body I left in the woods, on the grounds that a stomach burial is a lot more convenient than an earth burial. There are things in those woods with stomachs. Then I sat down and worked out the actual problem, which was not the man. It was that somebody knew where I was. Either that force has people inside the Divine Sword Sect, or the Thousand Feather Pavilion sells the same information twice. Reputation is the most important thing in the intelligence business. Shi Kang came back up the road cheerfully and stopped when he saw I had acquired a bundle. Where did that come from? Someone gave them to me on the road. Ding accepted that. Ding then told me his news, which he was thrilled about, which was that the mystic underworld sect was pouring squad after squad into the Dream Cloud Marsh. Perhaps our Divine Sword Sect is about to go to war with the mystic underworld sect. Ding said that the way a man says the fishing is good this year. I felt my stomach drop because if the Divine Sword Sect becomes unstable, how am I supposed to quietly strike the bell? The alchemy went badly in an interesting way. It always does when the object is worth more than the people handling it. A one-armed true disciple called Senior Brother Ma worked out that a deal was happening. Ding wore two swords, one on his back and one on a chain. Ding had invented a paired blade form for a single arm because losing the arm had not seemed to him like a good reason to stop. Ding came to Shi Kang and asked for one of the pills for his own father. His family was powerful, a peak master and 4 elders with real weight behind them. Shi Kang told him no. Even if 3 gathering life pills are refined, he said, the 3rd one already has an owner. Ding did not have to do that. Ding could have sold my share out from under me. I would have found out 6 months later. It was simply not in him. I have adjusted a great many of my opinions about people over the years, and never that one. Master Pu produced 2 pills. That is what he told us. 2. I found out afterward that the batch had made 4. The 3rd went to the sect, quietly, for Feng Long, because the leadership was not going to let a divine sword holder wither away. And the 4th Master Pu sold to the Ma family in exchange for a guaranteed disciple's place for one of his own descendants at the next examination. Everybody got paid. That is how the world works. The only reason I got my share is that a bald idiot from Wook Peak has a spine. I carried it up the mountain myself. My master was kneeling in the vegetable bed talking about spiritual rice, which he had wanted to plant for 2 years and could not justify. Ding looked at the little jade bottle in my hand and knew what it was before I opened it. Is this a gathering life pill? Ding did not make a speech. Ding did not refuse it twice, the way old men in stories do. Ding swallowed it standing in the dirt. His face came back, color into the cheeks, and then, over about a minute, patches of his hair going from white back to black in streaks, and the air around him got warm, and then, for the first time in 11 years, my master lifted his martial intent. Ding stood in a vegetable patch and raised the power of the true core realm, and his eyes went red. So many years of recuperation, he said, are worth less than 1 pill. 40 to 50% back. Not what he was, not close. But out of the chair, off the blanket, and able to walk up a mountain without stopping halfway. Let us go, he said. Come and have a few drinks with me to celebrate. We got extremely drunk for the second time. Now let me tell you what I did about the maps, because it is my favorite thing I have ever done, and it took 2 days. I sat in my shed with a stack of tanned hide and sword 18, and I forged maps, real ones first. 3 of the 4 sections I copied exactly, both layers, every raised line, because the surest way to be believed is to be mostly honest. The 4th section I faked, carefully, not randomly. A fake made by a man who had studied the real thing for 6 years and knew precisely which parts had to look right. Then I split each sheet into 4 with one motion of a finger and stacked the results in a crate. Then I put on a black cloak and went out on a moonless night. I came back 11 days later with nothing. I had seeded the entire principality of Taixingdao, prefecture by prefecture. A quarter in a tomb here, a quarter in a temple ruin there, a quarter in the false bottom of a chest in a merchant's house, a quarter in the hands of a bandit who did not know how he had acquired it. 3 sections in dozens of copies. The 4th section, the fake, released in exactly 3 copies because scarcity is what makes people believe. Within a year, the entire country was digging. There were fights in 6 prefectures. There were alliances made and broken over pieces of leather. Every major power in the region got involved, including, this is the part I want carved on something, the Divine Sword Sect itself. And nobody, anywhere, was following me anymore. I want to be fair to the council. They almost caught it. They laid 2 identical maps side by side on the table and stared at them, and Jian Quansheng said the correct thing. Possibly even recently made. I think someone is stirring up trouble with extremely malicious intentions. Ding was completely right, and then greed took the meeting because the Mystic Underworld sect was collecting, and the Purple Firmament sect was collecting. The 100 Flowers Palace was collecting, and Prince Zhong's mansion was collecting, and a sect that abstains from a treasure hunt that everyone else is running is a sect that has decided to lose. They posted an unlimited standing mission to buy Taiping treasure trove maps. Si Kang came sprinting up my hill to cut me in on the opportunity, and in the middle of his pitch, he dropped one detail. Turning in a single treasure trove map even exempts you from next year's intersect missions. I would like to describe my face at that moment. I cannot, because I did not see it. Shi Kang described it later as the look of a man who has just remembered where he left something. I could make those maps in a shed out of scrap leather at a rate of about 6 an hour. I talked him out of going, told him it was too dangerous, declined the trip, and waited about 4 months, so it would not look like anything. That was also the winter the eagle grew up and the stones started to die. Little Black had outgrown every other eagle in the range by several sizes on a diet of medicinal pills and whatever he killed. Ding had taken to sitting on my shoulder in the morning and leaving for the day like a man going to work, and the demon stone went dull. I had been taking energy from it 3 times a day, and it had gone from black glass to gray chalk. There was no second one anywhere in the world that I could buy, because a major sect that found one would either seal it in a vault or destroy it, and either way it never comes to market. Sword Intent, True Image, 25 out of 100, at 1 point per decade of ordinary work. Then the sect leader called 11 of the best young disciples into a closed hall and told us that we were going on a secret mission, that all of us were at least innate, that the one-armed Ma Ji would lead. I cannot disclose the details yet. You will know when we arrive. Shi Kang whispered the important part on the way out, which is that secret missions do not pay points, they pay merit. Whether you become an elder later or an elder with real power depends on merit. I took the black cloak. I also stopped in Linjin City on the way, because it was on the road, which it was not. I had given the girl a name by then. Lin Yu. She was 7 or 8, and she talked now, in short sentences, mostly about things that had happened weeks ago, as if they were happening currently. She still grabbed my sleeve with both hands when I arrived. She no longer cried when I left. That took 4 years, and I counted every one of them. 7 days by horse and then by boat, to a dead little fishing landing on a river with fog on it. Junior brother Zai, I said, while he paced. What is the rush? It is not time yet. The briefing came on the 3rd day. We are to assist the Royal Dragon Guardian Pavilion in eradicating a moon worship cult outpost. The identity of Divine Sword Sect disciples must absolutely not be revealed. There was a map of a fortress built onto a sheer cliff, and a rule. Only those wearing the same night suits as ours are not enemies. Any resistance you encounter may be killed without mercy. Ding handed out the black clothes and the masks. I put mine on over the black cloak, which is what I did on every job from that year onward. 2 skins. If a night ever went badly enough that Lin Dao had to stop existing for 10 minutes, the second one was already on, and nobody would have to watch me put it there. Down in a hidden room under that fortress, at that same hour, a woman in black under a veil was being given a full set of treasure trove maps. I know because of what the master of that fortress said to her, and because 2 people in that room lived. Their target is my Liang family, he said. It is me. Take those few with you. As for me, it is time to dedicate myself to the holy cult's great cause. Ding left her two attendants and walked upstairs to die. The wall closed behind her and stopped being a wall. The assault opened with an explosion and a fire as the signal, and men in black came out of the dark from every direction at once. The Liang fighters did not surrender, not one of them, and some of them had red eyes. I put that together with everything else I knew and arrived at the sentence I had been circling for 2 years. So the force behind the half-demons is the moon worship cult. There was a voice above the roofs, enormous, furious. You old eunuch, why does your dragon guardian pavilion keep targeting my Liang family? Because we know you are a remnant of the moon worship cult. Die. 2 top grandmasters went up into the night and came down together, and one of them was laughing on the way, and the laugh stopped part way. Then something red came into our formation. It was a half-demon, and it was nothing like the one I had killed. Spurs of bone out of the wrists and the spine, faster than anything that size should move, and 11 innate disciples of the Divine Sword Sect went backwards in a body. Ma Ji took it alone. Nobody else dared step in, including me, and I want to say plainly that I could have. I did not, because 11 people were watching and I have a bell to protect. Ding got pushed. Badly. And then he did the thing his family is famous for. Ding is famously not allowed to do in public, which is that the second sword came off the chain and went into the air on its own. It came in behind the thing and went through the heart. The half-demon shrank as it fell, and by the time it hit the flagstones, it was a woman. Then it was a dead woman, and Ma Ji stood there breathing hard with one arm and did not say anything at all. And on a hill a mile away, 3 survivors watched the fire. Grandpa, father, mother, and the woman under the veil said, in a voice with nothing in it, Dragon Guardian Pavilion, Chai Royal Family, Great Chong Imperial Court, one day my holy sect will kick you down from your lofty clouds into the mortal dust. I did not hear that. Nobody on our side heard that. I am telling you now because in about 9 years I am going to meet her, and I want you to know she earned it. I went home and 2 months later went to a birthday party. It was my father's 50th. Dozens of tables in the courtyard of a house that could not really afford dozens of tables, and a drunk official asking loudly why the eldest son was not present, and my brother Lin Hao performing a smooth answer he had clearly rehearsed for years. Then a servant came through the gate at a run. The young master has returned. Ding left his own banquet. 50 years old, in front of the whole county, my father walked out of his own birthday and left them sitting there. I did not go into the hall. I went to the side courtyard where this body had grown up. It was exactly as it had been left, and it was clean. Somebody had been cleaning an empty room for years. Father, it is good that you are back, he said. It is good that you are back. Ding said it twice, the way my master says okay 3 times. I would not go out to the guests. I said I would visit my mother's grave in the morning, and I did. And that night, Lin Hao came in and went down on his knees on my floor. Their mother had been sent away, not quietly, not with a settlement. My father had put her out of the house. She had taken vows in a temple somewhere, and Lin Hao had watched it happen and had known exactly why. I am willing to atone for my mother's sins, he said, crying. Do as you please. I put a hand on his shoulder. A few years ago, I said, I would definitely have killed her. Ding did not move. From now on, you will show filial piety before our father on my behalf. Ding went out of that room shaking, with his robe soaked through, and years later he told someone that it was not the words. It was the pressure that came off me when I said the first sentence, that he would not forget it as long as he lived. I stayed 2 days. I bowed at a grave. I rode home. And on the way through the mission hall, I handed in a treasure trove map that I had found, with great difficulty, in the field. A mountain of contribution points and 2 years of missions waived. Then, in the middle of a quiet year, the demon stone made a small sound in the night and fell apart into gray powder in my hand. That was the end of that road. Without it, the immaculate saint body would sit exactly where it was forever, and where it was not enough. I could not fight a celestial being. I had watched one flatten 12 men without turning around. So I looked at the point on the map I had been not going to for 6 years. I did the arithmetic about how long I could afford to keep being patient. And that same season, the news came up the hill that decided it for me. My master brought it, and he was not smiling. It is very likely that the current martial emperor is about to pass away. The Great Chang has 2 thrones, a civil emperor who rules, and a martial emperor who guards. In 1,000 years, there have been more than 20 civil emperors and 5 martial ones. The current one comprehended a martial intent at 11, entered the innate realm at 13, became a celestial being at 35, and took the martial emperor's seat at 57, and no fewer than 20 celestial beings have died at his hand. Ding was the reason nothing had happened yet. The princes, the schools, the cult, all of them had spent decades not moving because of one man. I was 29 years old. Perhaps, I said, I should also go and unearth the treasure trove of the Taiping sect. My master asked why now. Time waits for no one. That was the whole answer, and it was enough for both of us. Manhwa County is the poorest corner of the principality. The town is built in among the rocks like something growing in a crack. I never thought the Taiping sect's treasure would be under a place like this. That is exactly why it was there. I went in at night to an abandoned temple with a statue in it that had lost its head and both arms a very long time ago, and from the statue's base I took my bearing on a formation of rock they call the Bull's Horn, soared through the scrub, and there was a cave behind it. Then an hour of crawling through what the locals would call a sheep's gut, on a route I had memorized 6 years earlier and had never once written down, and at the end of it a set of doors with 4 characters cut into them, Taiping Holy Cave. I put my spiritual sense through the crack to check politely the way you do. It came back so hard I went pale and sat down. Something in there had swatted my perception like an insect. It was the bell that caught the recoil, ringing in my head on its own without being asked, which it had never done before. Good heavens, what exactly is inside? I broke the doors, and I walked into a palace that could not possibly have fit inside that hill, columns going up out of sight, reliefs of things with too many limbs, in poses I did not want to understand. And under my boots the floor crunched, and I did not look down, and I kept walking. At the far end, there was a throne of gold, and on the throne there was a figure 20 feet tall with the head of a wolf and silver-white fur and the torso of a man, and it was looking at me. Every step forward doubled the pressure. Even a celestial being would have found it hard to approach that thing. So I went slowly, step, 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 and on the last one, when my foot came down on the base of the throne, everything went out like a lamp. Gray cave, ordinary rock, no palace, no columns, no reliefs, and on a stone slab, a dried husk the size of a large man, with nothing left in it at all. It had been dead for 1,000 years. The entire palace had been the last thought of a corpse, still running, on nothing. I dug a stone out of the chest of that husk with the point of my sword. It came free the size of my fist. It was black glass, and next to it my mind stone had been a piece of chalk. There was also a ring on one of the claws. Black iron, plain, ugly. I rang the bell against it out of curiosity, and it cracked. My perception went into it and got pulled, and I ended up standing in a cave holding a ring and staring at nothing while my mind stood in a room that did not exist, a storage space, inside a ring. This world has storage rings. 9 years of hauling supplies up a hill on my back, and this world has storage rings. The reason I did not know is that they belong to demons. The demons have been gone for 1,000 years. It resized itself onto my finger while I was still swearing. I sat down on the floor of that cave and went through it, item by item, because a man who does not inventory a storage ring is a man who gets surprised by his own pocket. Weapons first, because they were the largest. 8 of them, laid out on a rack that came with the ring, and every one of them was built for a hand about twice the size of mine. A glaive I could not have lifted at 15 and can barely swing now. A hooked thing with no name, all of them in perfect condition because nothing rusts in there. Then oars, 14 kinds in labeled crates, and I could not read a single label. Then pills, rows of them, in sealed jars, each jar with 3 or 4 characters on it that meant nothing to me. Some of them were fresh. That is the part I sat with for a while. There were medicinal pills in that ring that had been sealed for over 1,000 years and looked like they had been rolled that morning. Then a case at the back that I nearly missed, and inside the case, packed in rows, several hundred crystals about the size of a hen's egg. I picked one up and my hand went numb to the elbow. They were full. That is the only way I can put it. Origin key, the raw material that a cultivator spends his whole life scraping out of the air a breath at a time, compressed into a stone you could put in a pocket, and there were hundreds of them, and they had been sitting under a hill in the poorest county in the principality while men aged themselves to death trying to reach the next realm 60 miles away. I called them origin stones because there was nobody there to correct me. With one of them burning next to me, my rate went from 9 days a point to 6. And on the way back out through the sheep gut passage, in the dark, I finally let myself have the thought I had been holding down since the throne room. That palace was a corpse's last idea. 1,000 years dead, nothing left in the body at all, and it had still built me a hall and a throne and a god sitting on it, and I had walked toward that god for 4 minutes with my hands empty and my heart going, and the only reason it did not stop my heart on the 3rd step is that a bell rang in my skull without being asked. I have never found out what the demons actually were. I have found out what one of them can do after 1,000 years of being dead, and it was enough. In the capital, that same month, the empire came apart. The Grand Empress Dowager is 200 years old and looks about 40. She went out to the ancestral tombs in a chariot drawn by 9 phoenixes to take receipt of the imperial family's sacred artifact. Her relatives, in their python robes, knelt down across the road in front of her. We earnestly request the Grand Empress Dowager to return to the imperial palace. They said it 3 times. An old man among them threatened to break his head open on the tomb gates. The red guards of the mausoleum whipped them off the road, and not one of those men in python robes dared to fight back, which tells you exactly what was standing behind the whips. And on the hill above the road, 4 supreme celestial beings were watching: an old scholar, an old woman with an iron crutch, an enormous monk in gray who said, I quote, that such a sacred artifact should rightfully be held by the martial emperor's son, and a prince with a black beard, a blood-red mole between his brows, and 6 fingers on both hands. We are merely purging corrupt officials, said the 6-fingered one. How can that be called rebellion? Then a claw of chi the size of a barge went at her, and the entire jade capital caught fire at once. In the hall of the Candle Dragon, where they keep the lamps, something that had been sitting in a bronze coffin for a very long time stood up, and the coffin filled with a red liquid. The thing drank it and stopped being dried out, and in its hand was the object everyone had come for. I heard about that months later, and in pieces, and in the same hall, some months earlier, something happened that I would have paid a great deal of money to be in the room for. There are thousands of lamps in the hall of the Candle Dragon, and a bronze coffin at the end of it. And an old man walked the length of that hall and laid a piece of leather down in front of the coffin. The 4th map, the last section. The 1-3 empires had been tearing each other apart over for 8 years. The leather lifted off the floor on its own, and the thing in the coffin sat up. It had no eyes, only a pale fire where the eyes go. It looked at that map for about the length of one breath, and the map turned to dust in the air. The other 3 were made using the layout of the 72 heavenly mechanism arrays, it said. This one is completely chaotic. It is clearly a fake. I made that in a shed, at night, out of tanned hide, in the middle of a bad mood, and it took me 2 days. I want to be modest here, and I cannot be. Every power in the region had been hunting that 4th section for the better part of a decade. The Divine Sword Sect had a standing, unlimited requisition on it. The moon worship cult had spent lives on it, and the reason the real one was never found is that the real one had been ground off a piece of paper with a kitchen knife by a 17-year-old servant who was being careful. Then the thing in the coffin said the rest of it. The rest of it was not funny at all. Even if I obtain the complete map, what can I do with it? If it truly could serve, then the Taiping sect would have won back then. A pause, in a hall of 10,000 lamps. We no longer have time. Proceed with the final plan. Nobody in that hall asked what the final plan was, which tells you they already knew. And in a garden 2 provinces away, Prince Jiang was being told by a man with a fan that a certain object, a national treasure capable of determining the rise and fall of a dynasty, was about to change hands. The Divine Sword Sect's contribution to all of that was decided by lottery. Tang Heng sent the order down, and it required 1/3 of every grandmaster in the sect to go to the capital, and since there was no honest way to choose who, they drew for it. 2 of the 7 peak masters, 12 of the 32 elders with real power, 2 of the 4 sword envoys. I was not in that hall. I have had it described to me by 3 people, and all 3 of them described the same thing, which is that when the names were read out, nobody made a sound. Then the sect leader stood up and bowed to them. Properly. All the way down, the way a junior bows to a senior, the head of the Divine Sword Sect to 16 of his own people. Everyone, I entrust this to you. Ding knew. They knew. Every man in that room had done the arithmetic on what 1/3 of a sect's grandmasters is for, and it is not for winning. What I had at the time was a black stone. The first grain of it went through me like a struck bell. If the Mind Stone had been the grade of a heavenly being, this one was the grade of a martial saint. The difference was not a percentage. 1 practice session, 1 point. What had been taking days? And inside the ring there was more. Pills I could not identify with demon script on the labels. Ores I had never seen. Weapons made for hands larger than mine, and several hundred crystals about the size of a hen's egg, packed in a case, each one full of clean, dense origin key. I called them origin stones because nobody was there to correct me. With those in the room, my rate went from 9 days a point to 6. The news from the capital reached us in a bamboo tube. I am told the sect leader's hand shook when he broke the seal. The old martial emperor has passed away. The Grand Empress Dowager temporarily holds the martial emperor's authority. The chaos in the Jade capital has been quelled. Nobody in that hall was happy about the 3rd sentence. Everybody in that hall knew what the 2nd one meant, because the last time a woman held both seats, 200 years ago, they called it the Shadow Empress Rebellion. They are still finding the graves. The cost for us went on a list. A peak master crippled, 1 sword envoy dead, 3 elders with real power gone, and 11 ordinary ones. And the Grand Uncle Master, our only celestial being, badly enough hurt that he stayed in the capital to heal. More than a dozen celestial beings died in that city in one night. That is a number no living person had ever expected to say. The ring also had a book in it, thick, bound in the hide of something with no name, covered in writing that matched nothing. My master suggested an old retired elder named Ma, who had spent 60 years chasing rare scripts, so I tore out exactly exactly 1 page and took it to Linjin City. Elder Ma turned it over twice. This should be the hide of an unusual beast. The processing technique is not up to par. Then he stopped talking. Then he got up. Then he said in an entirely different voice, "Good heavens, this is demon script, older than barbarian script." Ding could read less than 1% of it. Ding was 70-something years old, and he looked like a boy who had been handed a sword. "Give me time," he said, "and I am confident I can research a portion." I went home and broke into the true core realm. It was a year later, on a mountainside 40 miles out. 6 strands of ki tore the 4-phase structure apart, and a 7th came in. The 7-star field closed, and at the middle of it, something crystallized about the size of a sesame seed and pulled 90% of everything I had into itself. The difference between true essence and true core is not the difference between 2 ranks. It is the difference between water and ice. And on the way home, I nearly walked past the thing that mattered most that year. There was a man riding out of the sect gate in the middle of the night. Not a courier, no lantern, no announcement, the wrong gate. I filed it. Then I put the black cloak on and patrolled for a few nights, because I had nothing better to do and because a man on a hill develops hobbies. On the 4th night, the same rider went out to a big tree on the ridge and made a sound like a pigeon, and out of the dark came the same sound back. They talked by sending sound directly, which only innate can do, so I could not hear a word. I came down between them like a leaf. A fan of needles came at me and went into the trees. A flying sword came at me. I caught it in my bare hand and took it away from him. Then I picked both of them up by the collar and went up. I dropped them in front of the main hall in the middle of a council session and left. I am told the shouting was considerable. One of them was a stranger. The other was Elder Wu of the Divine Sword Sect. The Hall of Punishment took half an hour. Prince Jiang's mansion has received news in advance and plans to strike first. They intend to take down the Divine Sword Sect quickly and then raise the banner of rebellion under the pretext of purging the Emperor's side. The Mystic Underworld Sect and the Purple Firmament Sect have already gone over to the prince. Kai Bo, when it was over, asked the room the question I had been curious about myself. "Who do you think captured those 2? And Deng Yu said slowly that taking 2 grandmasters alive, without a single mark on either of them, would be difficult even for him. Then he remembered something the Grand Uncle Master had said about a mysterious person with a true image intent who had rung a bell inside his head. "Whoever that is," Deng Yu said, "he bears no ill will toward the Divine Sword Sect." And I had gone home and gone to bed because I had a strike in the morning. The sect went dark after that. Forces pulled back to key cities. Retired elders called in. Old family houses of former disciples activated and armed. I rang the bell on schedule. My private plan, which I never told anyone and which I want on the record because it is the true measure of my character at that age, was this: if it goes badly enough, put the bell away and run as far as possible. Where there is life, there is hope. Prince Jiang, meanwhile, was in his own hall being furious about the leak. That fool was so careless. Ding exposed the news ahead of time. And a man with a fan named Mr. Wang leaned in and gave him a better plan than the one he had lost. "Do not hit the sect, hit Yi City, which is the iron, and hit the 100 Flowers Palace, which is the gate to the Kunwu path. Plan for defeat," said Mr. Wang, before planning for victory. The prince laughed and said, "With you assisting me, I can match 2 heaven-rank experts. It is a very good line, and I have wondered since whether Mr. Wang enjoyed it." Yi City went in one night. Black armor into the estates and the mines, the Legion camp broken open from inside, and a great grandmaster called Elder Jin died holding a bridge so the rest could get out. That is also the night I learned my bell had a wartime function. Shu Jian came up my mountain at a dead run in the dark, in his robes of office, and got out one sentence between breaths. Sect leader's order. If an external enemy invades, the bell on the bell tower rings 9 times. 9. All disciples prepare for battle. 9 strikes. My bell. The signal for the end of the world. I said yes sir like a professional and went inside and sat down and had a moment about it. Then celestial beings started arriving. Heavenly person. May came from the Night King Manor, which was the court paying attention. We braced for an assault that did not come because the prince had gone the other way and broken the gates of the 100 Flowers Palace instead. Deng Yu worked it out on the map in about 4 seconds. Shang Prefecture is the only road into the Kunwu path. If the 100 Flowers Palace does not want to be annihilated, their only option is to join Prince Jiang's faction. Then the Grand Uncle Master came home from the capital, alive. Ding brought 2 more with him, Gao Celestial Human of the Royal House, and Celestial Being Lei of the 100 Flowers Palace, who had nothing left to go back to. Yi said it to her face, in the hall, in front of everyone. Under a great trend you cannot stand aside. If you had chosen earlier, you would not have buried 1,000 years of your own foundation. She did not answer him. There was nothing to answer. My master's assessment of my role in the coming war was delivered over breakfast. At this stage, you juniors probably will not be needed. Ding was correct, and he was also handing me the most productive 18 months of my life, because while the Divine Sword Sect held a line at Yi City, I stayed home and did science. I named the eagle Little Black, which is not a good name. I want it stated that he answered to it enthusiastically and therefore has no standing to complain. Ding was hunting for himself by then and bringing me things I had not asked for, and I had a ring full of demon pills with labels I could not read, so I built a shed next to my shed and filled it with cages. The first rat got a grain of powder off one pill and licked it up happily, and then beat its own head against the bars until it stopped, and then came apart. I sat there looking at the cage for a while. Fortunately, I thought, I did not simply feed that to Little Black. After that, I did it properly, which means I stopped guessing and started writing things down. Zhenming built the cages. Ding built 40 of them over 2 months, and he never once asked what they were for. I have since decided that the single greatest quality a person can have is a total absence of curiosity about their employer. The method was simple and extremely boring, which is why it worked. 1 pill, ground fine. 1 dose, measured against a grain of rice. 1 animal, 1 dose, 1 line in a book. Then the same dose again on a second animal to see whether the first result was the pill or the animal. Rats first, because rats are cheap, and a farmer 3 miles down the road was delighted to sell me a bucket of them and told everyone in Linjin City that the man on the Bell Mountain had gone insane. Then birds, then rabbits, which are big enough to see the changes on. Then dragonflies and wasps, because I wanted to know whether the effect scaled with the size of the animal or against it. It scaled with nothing. It simply pushed. Everything that survived came out past the top of what its species is supposed to be able to be. My rabbits went to 2 and 3 times normal size and stayed rabbits, entirely rabbit-shaped and rabbit-minded, just enormous. The dragonflies went to 10 times and had to be kept under cloth. The wasps got out once. I am not going to discuss the wasps. Zhenming would like it on the record that he was not paid enough that month, and he is correct. What I was actually looking for was in the 7th bottle. It took 11 months to find it. It looked like nothing at all, an animal that got stronger without getting stranger. No red in the eyes, no change in behavior. A rat that could pull 4 times its own weight and still ran from a shadow like a rat. That was the one. That was the whole point of the exercise. Everything the moon worship cult does to a person, it does by trading the person away. That is why their soldiers have to be pointed at something and released. And in a wooden shed on a hill with a rat in a cage, I had a dose that did the first half and skipped the second. I sat there at 2 in the morning looking at it and understood for the first time that I was going to be able to hand somebody a bottle and change their entire life without taking anything from them. I want that to sound noble, and I will admit what I thought immediately afterward, which was that I should test it on a person. That the correct person was going to be somebody who was already dying, and in the middle of all that, the immaculate saint body hit 99 out of 100. I went 60 miles out to a beast cave in the mountains and took the entire remaining stone in 1 dose. My body caught fire from the inside, my skin split. Gold came out of me and evaporated as red mist, and every cell I had came apart and reassembled and came apart again. My hair fell out and grew and fell out for what felt like an hour. The cave came down on top of me partway through and I did not notice. Then the mountainside exploded and I was hanging in the air, not flying on ki. There was a light around me that was not ki at all. I have never found a name for it. My face in the water afterward was the same face. It has always been the same face. But I was standing differently, and my eyes had gone deep in a way that made me uncomfortable to look at. Immaculate saint body, perfection, and a line I had never seen before. Divine ability, chi and blood saint domain. Prototype, 1 out of 100. The domain does one thing and it does it to everything alive inside its radius. It suppresses the blood and chi of any living creature, not the chi in their techniques, the stuff underneath. Even a master who lives on true essence starts to fail inside it, because a master is still a body, and it lets me fly, actually fly, without the celestial realm, expensively, on my own blood, but genuinely. I found out what the domain was worth about a month later, at night, on a hill 100 miles from home. There was a celestial being dying up there, his ki was burned out, and there was blood coming up his throat. Ding was not going to make the last 100 miles. Tang Heng, our grand uncle master, the bald old man with the door-sized sword who had once sat in a tree above my platform and called me lazy. And coming in after him, in no hurry at all, was Chen Ao of the mystic underworld sect, who had chased him 2,000 or 3,000 miles over 1 full day and night. Tang Heng, he said, you really can run. No wonder they call you Tang the Swift. The old man bluffed. Ding said there was an ambush waiting, And while he said it, he threw a needle-thin sword out of the tree line from an angle nobody would expect. It went through a divinely forged glove. Chen Ao took it and answered with a palm, and that was very nearly the end. Then I opened the domain. I want to describe what it looks like from outside, because a survivor described it to me years later without knowing who he was describing it to. There is no light and no sound. The air does not change. What happens is that everything alive inside a certain distance simply begins to lose. Chen Ao's blood came out of his control. Then the bell went off inside his skull. Then his consciousness went out like a snuffed wick. And then I cut him in half in the air. I took the divinely forged gloves off the body and threw the old man his own needle sword back and turned to go. Wait, benefactor, please leave your name. This tang will surely repay you. I flew off into the dark without a sound like an owl, because that is the only exit available to a man in a black cloak who cannot afford a conversation. Ding buried the corpse himself before he left. I watched from about a mile up. Old Chen, he said, patting the dirt flat, if there is a next life, do not talk so much nonsense. I went home and made myself sit down and be honest about what had just happened, because the temptation after your first celestial kill is to believe things about yourself. The man had been chased for 24 hours. Ding was empty. I ambushed him from cover with a domain he had never heard of and a bell he did not know existed, and if I had met him fresh, in daylight, in the open, he would have taken me apart, steady, low-key. Nothing has changed, but the perfected body had changed one number. One practice session was now 1 point, and my sessions had doubled. They carried Tong Heng into the main hall 2 days later, and he lied to the entire leadership of the Divine Sword Sect. Ding did not mention me. Ding said it was luck and that Chen Ao had been overconfident, that if the man had been careful, he would be the dead one. And the reason he lied, which I learned much later from a man who was in the room, is that he had decided a hidden immortal operating around the Divine Sword Sect was a form of invisible protection, that the fastest way to lose it was to tell people it existed. Celestial being Lei took the news badly, in the good way. Chen Ao had been one of the 3 who hunted her out of the 100 Flowers Palace. Meanwhile, I had a pharmaceutical problem, in that I had invented something and could not tell anybody. I called it the giant blood demonic pill first, which was accurate and embarrassing, and then renamed it the strong blood demonic pill, which was neither. What it did, once I had the dose right, was 3 things. It caused an explosive surge in blood and qi, and an overdose tore the body apart from inside. It strengthened every tissue in the animal without mutating any of it. And it broke the size ceiling of the species, which is why my wasps were the size of sparrows, and why I now had rabbits I could not lift with one hand. I gave Little Black a single drop. Ding stood on my forearm and shook for about a minute. I stood there with my heart going. Then he took off and did not come back until sunset. When he did, his feathers had a gloss on them like wet lacquer. Ding was hungrier than I had ever seen him. That is when I worked out the mechanism. Ding flies all day. The flying burns off the residue before it can settle. That is why he gets stronger instead of swelling. Over in Ye City, the enemy command was having a confusing week. Zhang Feng, the prince's commander, an orphan the old prince had adopted and raised into a general, was sitting with the great elder of the mystic underworld sect and a Taoist called Wang Ming Zhenren who carried a divinely forged fly-whisk. They were waiting for Chen Ao to send word that Tang Heng was dead. The word that came instead was that Tang Heng had returned to the Divine Sword Sect, and Chen Ao had not returned to anything. And in the Jade Capital, in the Hall of the Candle Dragon, the lamps and the bronze coffin were gone. The whole hall had been redone in spiritual flowers, and one pot of those, outside a palace, would have started a war among collectors. The Grand Empress Dowager stood among them and drank the light off them. Still a little bit short, she said. Then she picked up an old bronze mirror with the rust eating into it, and looked into it, and what looked back out of that mirror was not her face. It was covered in fur. I did not learn about the mirror until much later. When I did, several things I had been calling coincidence stopped being coincidence. Lin Yu turned 11 or 12 and told me what she wanted. Uncle Dao, I want to take the Divine Sword Sect's entrance examination. I checked her bones, which I had been quietly avoiding doing. They were good, genuinely good. And the fist I had taught her 3 years earlier out of boredom on a rainy afternoon was at major achievement, which is not a thing that happens to a girl in a private school in a market town unless that girl trains until her hands bleed and then trains. She did not play with the other children. Her teacher told me that as a complaint. I heard it as a report. I asked her why she wanted it. That was the only useful question available, and I nearly did not ask it. She thought about it for a while. She always thinks about it for a while. And then she said that when she was small, there had been a night when she was in a place she could not get out of, and a man came and got her out. That she has never once been able to remember his face from that night, only the sound of the rope. I said nothing at all. Then she said the second half, and the second half is the reason I stopped arguing. If I am strong enough, she said, then next time I can be the one who comes. She was 11 years old. She had been going down to a private school in a market town for 4 years. She had spent every evening of it running a beginner's fist against a post in a courtyard until her knuckles split. Alone. Nobody watching. Nobody to impress. There is a hole in that girl, and she has decided to fill it with work. I know what that is. I have the same hole from a different direction. I gave her a bottle of pills. The corrections to her second form, and did not tell her that a girl of 11 with a major achievement fist and good bones does not need a sponsor to get into the Divine Sword Sect. She would have wanted to know how I knew. At Elder Ma's house, I got grabbed by the sleeve before I was through the door. I ask you, do you have any more of this Yao race script? Ding had a third of the first page. Just a third, and it had taken him years, and what it turned out to be was a chronicle, not a technique, a record of the most important events in the history of the demons, kept by the demons. Then he gave me his life's work, an entire notebook of his method, decades of it, handed across a table to a young man he barely knew. I only hope, he said, that my research can be inherited by someone. Reading demon script is not like reading. It is not pictographic. You have to visualize what the mark is describing until the pattern of it decomposes in your mind. I sat with that notebook for 2 weeks and got nowhere at all, so I rang the bell, and the mark unfolded itself. The bell had helped me with a fist, a sword art, an internal technique, a mural, a forest of ghosts, and now with the written language of an extinct species. At some point, I stopped being surprised and started being suspicious. I have never resolved the suspicion. It is the only thing about my life I have genuinely never explained. The sect council, that season, did 2 brave things and 1 desperate one. They doubled recruitment. They expanded the quota for commoners, which was pushed through by an elder named Huang, who had come up from nothing himself, over the objection of everyone whose nephew was on a list, and which mattered enormously later, and they accepted a legion. Mr. Gao came from the Night King Manor with an imperial edict permitting the Divine Sword Sect to raise a martial Dao legion of 10,000 temporarily for the war, commanded by the Night King's man, to be disbanded afterward. Shi Kang tried to recruit me into it, with Little Black sitting on my shoulder, and Little Black expressed his opinion of the proposal directly onto Z Kang's head. "You beast, how dare you?" Then he made his pitch anyway, and the pitch was genuinely good. It is the biggest open secret in the Empire. Comprehending a martial intent inside a martial Dao Legion has miraculous effects. A Legion lowers the difficulty for a peak Great Grandmaster to break through to Heaven Grade. The Imperial family has 28 of them, and everyone has a Heaven Grade expert as commander. That is why princes are not allowed legions. That is the whole mechanism of the dynasty in one sentence. I said no. My master confirmed the mechanism that evening and then told me the part Shi Kang had not known. Inside a legion, a weak intent gets assimilated by a strong one. The biggest beneficiary of a martial Dao legion is always the commander. Then is our Divine Sword Sect not at the biggest disadvantage? Yes, he said. There is nothing we can do about it. The armies met on the ice of the Qi River in the middle of winter. I was not in the line. I was in the air a mile up under a black cloak, watching, which is where I spent most of that war. Both banks were solid armor. A voice went out over the ice, beat the drums, form ranks. It reached every man on that river without being shouted, and then the 2 war spirits came up. Over our side, out of the massed will of 10,000 men, a white tiger the size of a hill. Over theirs, a coiled serpent, attack against defense. The 2 phantoms hit each other before a single soldier had moved. Then they charged, and the ice broke, and it did not matter. Men ran across open water on floating slabs like it was a paved road, because inside a legion, the armor grows a skin of qi, and the weapons grow an edge, and a boy who could not open a channel last year strikes like a ranked master. Si Kong was down there in his first formation. Ding told me afterward, glowing, that it was the greatest feeling of his life. And on a hill, a mile behind the enemy line, stood Zhang Feng and a woman in black under a veil. "Respected Saintess," he said, "we still need the assistance of your esteemed cult to defeat the Night King Manor's legion. When it is done, the entire territory of the Divine Sword Sect will be handed to your moon worship cult to control." She raised her hand. 1,000 figures in black came out of the reserve at a run, and as they ran, they came apart. Clothes tearing, bodies going up and out, and by the time they hit our line, every one of them was 2 meters of Grandmaster grade animal, and above them, out of their combined will, rose the shape of an enormous wolf, standing like a man. They went through the white tiger formation like a hand through paper. Whatever they touched stopped existing in a way I am not going to describe. Zhang Feng went white. "Is this your esteemed cult's half-demon army?" Even in the last rebellion, they had never put that on a field. And the Saintess stood there watching celestial beings fly overhead, and what she felt was envy, because that was the one thing her cult did not have, and behind that, she was still angry about the fourth map because the holy cave had never been found. She had been looking for it for 20 years. They called me down to a general assembly after that, and being called to a general assembly when you are a nobody innate is the worst news you can get. Every one of the 11 true disciples was in that hall. The Night King's army was broken. The prince's force was coming for the sect itself, and the sect leader announced the Tao lineage continuation plan. I did not know what those words meant. I looked around that hall to see who else did not know, and every single face over 40 had already gone still, which is how I found out. A Tao lineage continuation plan is what a school writes down in a locked drawer on the day it is founded, so that when the day comes, there will be no argument about it. It is a list. It says who leaves, 63 names. And then the sect leader read the second half of it, which is the part that made a hall of 400 people stop breathing. All other disciples, he said, all elders, all peak masters, and this sect leader will live and die with the Divine Sword Sect. Ding said it in the tone you would use for a duty roster. Ding did not pause before including himself, and he did not pause after. Then he moved to the next item on the agenda, which was the disposition of the outer wells. Outside on the square there were hundreds of wounded lying in rows on straw because the halls were full, men my own age with white hair, and a boy of about 14 going down the rows with a bucket and a ladle, who had clearly been doing it for days and had stopped talking to any of them. Somebody near me said the word annihilation out loud for the first time. Once anyone says it, everyone can say it, and by that evening it was just a word people used. That night, a man came up the road below the mountain on foot, with no armor left on him. The man walking beside him had one arm gone and claw marks down his back. That one saw the sect signboard over the gate, let out one breath, and fell over dead. Ding had run the whole way on nothing but the intention to arrive. Zikong caught him before he hit the ground. Senior brother Min. There were dozens of coffins in the outer hall, and most of them were full. I carried that one in and laid him in an empty one and did not say anything because there was nothing available to say. They evacuated Linjin City. They evacuated the new recruits. 4 celestial beings came back out of the sky torn up, and Gao Celestial Human had to tell the leadership that the Grand Uncle Master and Celestial Being Lei had stayed behind to block heaven-grade pursuit, in a sentence he could not finish. I sat on a roof that night with Shi Kong, who was not smiling for the first time since I met him. Junior brother Lin. Do you think the Divine Sword Sect can hold on? I said something. You have not seen those things, he said. They are not human at all. Is this still the world I know? The Tao Seed evacuation went out through a tunnel behind a rock in Yanmen Valley. I was on the list, and I still do not know who put me there. 40 of the best disciples in the sect stood in that valley. Then 11 true disciples came down out of the air to join them, and there was a revolt. I will not evacuate. I want to live and die with the Divine Sword Sect. My master died in battle. How can I run? And the senior one shouted them down. How foolish. You are not running away. You are being preserved for a use. There was a storeroom under that hill. It had been stocked a long time ago by somebody very careful. 63 packs on 63 hooks, each with a name on a wooden tag, and inside each pack a different piece of the foundation of the Divine Sword Sect. Manuals, formation plates, the seal of a peak, seeds, actual seeds, in wax. Nobody was carrying the whole thing, because the whole thing is what you lose in one ambush. Mine had my name on it. Somebody had written Lin Dao on a tag in advance in an underground room and hung it on a hook, and I stood there looking at that tag for longer than I should have. They went down into the dark 2 by 2 with the lamps shielded. At the far end of that tunnel, where it comes out into a gully 3 miles from the mountain, most of them stopped and turned around and bowed toward a hill they could not see, in the dark, holding somebody else's life's work on their backs. I was at the back of the line, and about 100 yards in the dark, between one lamp and the next, I stopped being there. I have gone over that decision every year since. It has never once come out looking like courage. It was not that I could not leave them. It was not duty, and it was not the sect. It was certainly not the 62 people ahead of me in that tunnel. His ritual artifact was still on the bell tower. That is the entire reason. I have had 11 years to come up with a nobler one. I have not been able to. I came out of the hills behind the rebel camp 2 nights later and lay on my stomach in the wet grass with a spyglass I had ground myself out of boredom 4 winters earlier. I watched an entire legion move past me in the dark, 10,000 men, and the ground shook, and every bird and every fish in that valley left. Down by the river there was a fire and 2 celestial beings standing around a third who was sitting in the grass, not attacking, just waiting. Tang Heng again, because of course. You can only watch, Wang Ming Zhenren was saying pleasantly, as the Divine Sword Sect is destroyed. I waited for the moon to go into cloud. That took 11 minutes. Then I hit them with everything at once, the domain first, the bell second, and sword 18 third. Wang Ming Genren got out one silent shape with his mouth. No, save, saw. And Tang Heng, who was on the ground and half dead and had understood the situation before I had finished arriving, threw the needle sword at the other one to hold his attention. The head of Wang Ming Genren came off and went up. I am told there was an expression on it. Am I dead? Sun Jian went straight up into the sky, and I went after him. Ding was faster than me, and he knew it. So he used a shedding technique and came out of a suit of metal clothing, like an insect leaving a shell, and he was clear. Then I came up under him in gold light with the domain compressed into my fist. The point of the domain is that it works on everything alive within a radius. What I had just found out, in the air, at speed, is that the radius can be closed down to the size of a hand and thrown. His defensive aura came apart. Blood came up out of him in the wind. Damn it! What kind of attack is that? Then the sword. Why? He said. Why? I did not answer him, mostly because I had no idea what he was asking. Tang Heng was still sitting in the same patch of grass when I came down. Ding had watched a man in a black cloak kill 2 celestial beings inside 4 minutes. Thank you, fellow Taoist, he said, for saving my life. Again. I went through the bodies without a word and took the fly whisk, the saber, both divinely forged because I am a working professional, and then, on the way out, I turned around and threw him a yellow pill. For healing. Eat it. I said it in the roughest voice I could manage. I would like to claim it was compassion. Part of it was compassion. The other part is that I had tested that pill on rats, birds, rabbits, and one eagle, and had never once tested it on a person. I watched from 4 miles up. The wounds shut. His origin qi came back by about a fifth, which for a man with half a month left meant another 10 years. Ding got up on his knees in an empty field and bowed to nobody. Ding came back into the hall 2 days later in rags and enjoyed himself enormously. How could this old man die? Why do you not go out and ask what this old man's nickname is? And when they asked what had happened, he said, and I want the phrasing preserved. After I killed Wang Ming Genren and Sun Jian, I naturally came back alive. Then, more modestly, that it was just luck, and those two had been careless. Ding deliberately hid the black cloak, on purpose, from his own leadership, and put 3 Heaven Guest Elder tokens on the table to close the discussion. I had one job left before I could go home. It was the worst thing I have ever done. I am not going to pretend otherwise. I found the half-demon army on the road, following the legion, 1,000 riders and 1 covered wagon under a banner with a heavenly wolf howling at a moon on it, and they were not transformed. Their auras were tied together in a lattice I could feel from a mile up. I let the wagon go past. Then I came down on the tail of the column. The bell first, area wide, then the domain. They could not even react. Hundreds went down in the first pass like a field going over under a scythe. The front of the column had time. They turned and transformed and came back down the road at me at a full run. That is when I found out the thing that changed the war. The moment they crossed into the domain, they came apart, not died, reverted. Every one of them snapped back into a human being mid-stride and stood there in the road in the ruins of their own clothes, ordinary, blinking. The leader was 3 meters tall and had enough discipline left to form the rest into a line. I walked toward them, and the whole line lost its shape at once. His head was off before he came out of it. Behind them, the saintess of the moon worship cult stood beside her wagon watching 20 years of work be undone in about 6 minutes. That army was her capital. It was the only card her cult held that no empire could match. You, she said. You are a devil. Your moon worship cult creates these things, I said, and I am the demonic one? Her 2 attendants transformed, and they were a different kind, and it made no difference. She bit down on something in her back teeth and was gone before she hit the ground. She died quite decisively. I will give her that. I walked back down that road afterward, and it went on for a long way. That was the first time I had killed so many people at once. I would like to tell you it kept me awake. It did not, and that is the part that kept me awake. 2 days later, an envoy of the Divine Sword Sect walked into Jiang Feng's command tent and dropped 3 tokens on the map table. Now they are returned to their rightful owners. The commander's face went the color of the canvas, and before he had finished with that, a runner came in with the other report. The saintess of the moon worship cult and her entire escort, including the half-demon army, annihilated. What did you say? They rode out and looked at the road themselves. It is indeed the work of one person, said his scout captain, and a top-tier master of the sword. They spent the next week going through a list of imperial swordsmen, one name at a time, and crossing them all off. I went home. Officially, I was in a tunnel with 62 other people carrying the future of the sect. In practice, I was in a shed on a hill. The only people who knew I was supposed to be elsewhere were 4 men at the very top who had other things on their minds. Nobody was going to stop me from cultivating by striking that bell. Not an army. Waste is shameful. Zhen Ming had stayed. I had not told him to stay, and I had not told him to go. Ding had simply kept ringing it on the days I was away, and adjusting the glasses every 13 days and cooking for one. Senior brother Lin must have an unparalleled passion, he said, for the profession of striking the clock. Then he asked very quietly, looking at the floor, Senior brother Lin, can we win? Do not worry, I said. We can win. Jiang Feng made his decision 2 days after that, and it was the right one. We have no retreat. We must take the Divine Sword Sect at all costs. Tomorrow morning, they came at dawn, 3 legions in a black wave across the whole valley floor, and the sect threw up small formations wherever there were enough people to hold one, and Gao Celestial Human said out loud in front of everyone that he hoped we could hold out for a bit longer. And at the gates, with the front rank already inside bowshot, a bird came down onto Jiang Feng's shoulder with a tube on its leg. Ding read it and the blood went out of his face. Great Moon Pass has been breached. His Highness is severely wounded. The Imperial family's White Marsh Legion has already advanced. We must turn back and reinforce. 30,000 men turned around and walked away from a gate they were 4 minutes from taking. I was in the air on my way to do something extremely stupid when it happened. I remember hanging over that valley with the domain half open, watching an army leave and saying out loud to nobody, in a tone of pure indignation, something is not right, why are they retreating? Our Celestials did not pursue. In the open field a legion reforms and eats you. The sect went out of its mind with relief. And my master came around the corner of the cottage, saw me standing in my own yard, and physically flinched. Lin Dao, why are you here? Master, if I am not here, where would I be? Did you not leave? I looked him in the eye and said I had sworn to live and die with the Divine Sword Sect. It was beautifully delivered. Ding did not believe a word of it. Ding shouted at me for 11 minutes. The substance of it was that this time was good luck. Do you think you can be this lucky every time? I said yes, master, and no, master, and both of us knew the words were going past each other in the air. The sect leader took a different approach. Ding said, what nonsense. The Dao lineage continuation plan is not a child's game. Then, as punishment, he sent me out alone to go and bring the seed back. I have never been so efficiently punished by a man who thought he was being harsh. I found them in a village in Chan province, waiting for news. I arrived at the exact hour that several hundred people in black arrived to kill them. I heard the fighting from a mile out, and I heard my own name in it. Brother Zhen, could it be that Lin Dao betrayed the Divine Sword Sect and led the enemies here? I heard a long time ago that this person is greedy for life and afraid of death. Damn it, why would he do such a thing? I would like it noted that my reputation for cowardice had, by that point, saved my life about 6 times and cost me nothing. I still stood on a hill and felt it. 3 great grandmasters in front, 11 grandmasters on the flanks. Mystic underworld sect, collecting on a celestial being they were still angry about. And then one of our own, Zhou Qing of Xuanyang Peak, put a sword into Zhenshan's back from inside the circle. Zhou Qing, what are you doing? Ding did not answer. Ding dropped the blade and rolled out through the line, and the line let him through. Zhenshan burned his own life with a crimson tide technique and started giving orders. Junior brother Zhen, junior brother Chao, take a group each and break out. I will cover the rear. I put on the cloak and went up. Then I came down on the whole field at once. Who gave you Mystic Underworld Sect the guts to dare encircle and kill the Dao seeds of my Divine Sword Sect? A true image, intent over an entire battlefield, applied selectively. That is the part I had practiced for 6 years and never used. Every enemy on that field lost the strength in their arms. Every one of ours felt nothing at all except a warm pressure at their backs. Heavens, somebody said. A celestial being. I gave our side one word. Kill them. They went through those grandmasters like men mowing dry grass. When it was finished, 60-odd people knelt down in a field and thanked a black cloak for saving their lives. The rebel army has retreated. You may return to the Divine Sword Sect. Then I left, because 8 of them were dead. I had arrived 4 minutes too late for that. I did not want anybody looking at my face while I thought about it. I took the cloak off 2 ridges away and got back on a horse and rode north at a walk through fresh snow with a wine gourd. That is how I met the strangest man in this entire account. Ding caught up with me on a donkey. Ding was sitting on it backwards. An old man with a red nose and a beard full of frost, riding a donkey backwards through a snowfield, and he pulled up alongside and sniffed the air. Little brother, good wine. I gave him a jar of it. I had a cellar of the stuff by then, because in a previous life, I had known how sauce aroma liquor is made, and in this life nobody did. I had spent about a decade quietly committing the largest act of intellectual property theft in the history of 2 worlds. Ding drank half of it in the saddle. I have traveled all over the world and never tasted anything like it. So I gave him the method, the whole method, out loud, in a snowfield, to a stranger, for free, because I was in a mood and because it was not mine to begin with. Ding got very serious about that. I cannot take your unique brewing method for nothing. Here. Ding threw me a piece of white jade and slapped the donkey on the flank, and that animal went across the snow faster than any horse I have ever ridden, backwards rider and all. The jade had demon script on it, Great River Sword Chi, 3 layers, and the description of the first layer alone said it would carry a martial intent to the heavenly phenomenon grade. I want to be clear about what that means. Above true image, which no one in my sect has, there is heavenly phenomenon, which in 200 years the world has seen exactly once, in the old martial emperor. It is the reason he held the entire empire together by existing. An old man on a donkey traded me that for a wine recipe. I got back to the sect ahead of the seed and told the sect leader a lie. I said I had found many corpses of men in black. I said all the Tao Seed disciples were missing. I said I did not know what had happened. I had to. 63 people had watched a celestial being drop out of the sky 4 minutes after Lin Dao was due to arrive. If Lin Dao then walked in and reported the whole thing accurately, a very sharp person somewhere was going to put those 2 facts next to each other. The sect leader went pale and called Tang Hung. The old man came in and looked at me the way a butcher looks at a pig. Could it be that you, young man, are the problem? Great-granduncle master, disciple has been wronged. Wronged. Ding looked at me for a while longer. If I were in charge, I would never spare you. Then he flew off to find them himself, which he did. I went home and started on the Great River Sword Chi. That technique does not run chi through channels. It does not use the body at all. You build a river in your sea of consciousness. An endless river from horizon to horizon, made entirely of swords, and then you simulate its motion with your own intent, and you keep simulating it until it does not need you. Do that without help, and it takes decades. Do it with a bell ringing inside your skull, and the water goes still, and the river holds. Great River Sword Chi, first layer, 1 out of 100, and my intent moved the same night. Tang Heng found the seed a week later and landed among them and sat down on a rock. This old man ran back and forth several times before finding you all. On the trader, he was economical. Once you personally experience this old man's interrogation methods, you should speak. And on the black cloak, he gave a direct order to 62 people, which is the reason the story stayed inside the sect for as long as it did. You absolutely cannot speak of it. Anyone who does will be dealt with by sect rules. Let the world believe the Divine Sword Sect has 2 celestial beings. Let the world guess which. And privately, in his own tent, the old man had no idea what was going on in his own house. Who exactly is this mysterious heavenly human? The war turned that winter without any of us doing anything. The White Marsh Legion broke Great Moon Pass. Prince Fan went around Jing Pass. Prince Jiang took a serious wound and did not appear in public again. And the Divine Sword Sect voted to march, not because we were owed anything, but because a war ends with a division of the corpse, and a sect that is not standing over the body when it happens gets nothing. I had my own project. There were 7 jades in that black ring, each one under a film of energy that my spiritual sense slid straight off. It took me 2 weeks of experimenting to work out that the film was not keyed to spirit at all. It was keyed to blood and chi, and I had a domain made of exactly that. I sat in my shed for 3 weeks eating that film off a piece of jade like rust off iron. The first one I opened was called the Heavenly Yao Enlightenment Art. It explained in patient detail how to use the blood of a demon lineage to awaken a mind in an animal. I put it away and did not think about it again. I want to be honest about why. It was not ethics. It was that the phrase in the histories is, if they are not of my race, their hearts must be different. I sat there and pictured a clever little black. A little black with plans, a little black with opinions about his own future. I got a chill and shut the jade. A stupid little black is the best little black. Ding gets a whole fish every week, and he has never once had a thought in his life. Ding is the happiest creature I have ever known. Zikong came to say goodbye before the march and drank most of my good jar and delivered a review. Junior brother Lin, you really had foresight. After this great battle is over, I definitely do not want to participate in any martial Dao Legion ever again. Jiang City fell in the summer, walls 100 feet high, and around them, the White Marsh Legion, the legions of Prince Fan and the Night King, and a mass of conscripted men driven forward in front of them, who had been farmers 8 weeks earlier. The imperial commander was a woman named Liang, who stands over 8 feet tall in silver armor with a spear 12 feet long, and I saw celestial beings decline to look directly at her. Today we gather every strength we have, she said, and break Jiang City. Inside the city, Prince Jiang was sitting in a fur coat in front of 4 braziers in the middle of July, coughing, with ice in it, asking for more charcoal because he was freezing to death and demanding they bring his armor. And then his foster father came in, a white-haired old man who had raised an orphan into a general and then into a rebel. This old man will help you one last time. Over the White Marsh Legion, the war spirit came up, a baze the size of a thundercloud, and one old man walked out of the gate on his own and looked up at it. Today this old man will experience firsthand just how strong a martial Dao Legion really is. And behind him a mountain stood up. I do not have better words. There was a mountain in the sky, and it kept going up, and the higher it went, the older he got. I watched a man age 80 years in about 9 seconds while a peak the size of a province formed over his head. Then it came down. The bays almost came apart. The commander coughed blood into her own gauntlet. 30,000 men in the finest legion of the Great Chang went backwards off their line. And the old man, by then nothing but bones in a robe, sighed once and blew away on the wind. Inside the city, Prince Jiang screamed foster father and went down and did not get up again. My master came up my hill a month later with a smile he was not bothering to hide. Prince Jiang's mansion has been annihilated. Which was true, and which was not the end, because the mystic underworld sect, the purple firmament sect, were still standing, and because the reason we were all still alive was that the throne had needed us more than it disliked us. Then the sect leader called an assembly and told us there was a mystic underworld sect agent in the room. Peak Lord Qin, what do you say? Qin Jun said what any man would say. 15 generations of his family in this sect. His grandfather and his father both died in its service. The sect leader pointed at a candelabrum. We have been burning heavenly moth incense in this hall for 2 weeks. The scent stays half a month and transfers to everything the wearer touches. Our man inside the mystic underworld sect reported that smell there 4 days ago. And then the part that made the hall go quiet. You have lived as Qinjun for so long. You have probably come to believe you are Qinjun. The real one had been replaced years earlier. The family had been quietly ruined afterward to close the loop, which is why 15 generations of loyalty had been available as a defense. Nobody left alive to confirm it. They took him. I went home and read the second Jade, Lion Camel Ridge Array Dissection, Formations, which turned out to be, and I mean this precisely, like being handed advanced mathematics after a life of counting on fingers. The bell gave me the insight the way it always did, and a new line appeared on my panel that had never been there before. Auxiliary skills. 6 weeks to reach introduction, 1 out of 100, and I want to record that this is the only thing in my entire life I studied for pleasure. Every time a piece of formation theory opened up in my head, I felt a satisfaction I have never gotten from killing anybody. The war ended in the least satisfying way possible. We had the mystic underworld sect surrounded and dying, and 1,000 riders came over the hill. We are the Ding family of Yuan province, here by order of the Grand Empress Dowager. The Grand Empress Dowager's surname is Ding. That family is a branch of the Heavenly Blade clan, and they have 3 celestial beings. They took the entire territory of the Purple Firmament sect. They took 40% of the Mystic Underworld sect's land. They took a bite out of the 100 Flowers Palace on the way past. The Divine Sword Sect, which had held the line for 8 years and buried a peak master, a sword envoy, and 14 elders, received Xuan province. 1 province. Things will likely be very troublesome in the future, said my master, and went to look at his rice. I opened a window on myself for him that autumn because he had earned it. Master, my cultivation is already at the early stage of the true core realm. Then are you not entering the ranks of the great grandmasters? Ding was so pleased that he was upset within about 4 minutes, because a great grandmaster with no merit record does not become an elder. I had spent the war on a hill with a bell, as far as any official file was concerned. I made a sympathetic noise and thought privately about what happens to elders. In a crisis, elders are the first ones sent. I broke into the late stage 100 miles out. I did it with a trick. The domain does not only suppress, it can hold. It can carry true essence outside the capacity of the body itself, like a bucket next to a full cup, and I burned 3 origin stones to fill it to the brim and then dumped the whole thing into the breakthrough at once. 9th strand, the 9 palaces field, the core recrystallized, and the panel did not say 1 out of 100. It said 23, 22 points of free progress, which at that stage would have taken months. The year after that was peace, and I have almost nothing to report from it. I would trade a great deal to have it back. The sect rebuilt. Recruitment doubled again. Every servant who had lived through the war was made an inner disciple. Lin Yu came to say goodbye at 15 or 16, in white, with a sword. 4 years an inner disciple under an elder of Purple Lightning Peak, being transferred to Xuan province. She has her mother's face, I assume. I have no way of knowing. Try to smile more, I told her. She produced a smile. Forget it, I said. You had better not smile. Shi Kong made Elder ahead of schedule on his war record and immediately began insisting on being called Elder Shi, and came up the hill to demand wine and promised to keep an eye on the girl in Xuan province, and did. By then, the cellar on the back hill had a proper cellar in it. 2 labels, a clear one I called Qingyi, and the sauce aroma one, which I named after the platform, Chen Platform. It is the only monument I've ever put up to myself. It is a liquor, and I think that is about right. My first mission in years was a small ugly one. It turned into the day I paid a debt I had been carrying for 20 years. There was a gang called the Black Riders operating in Chuyan Prefecture. Refugees mostly, pushed off purple firmament sect land by the Ding family, whose administrative philosophy is that those who submit prosper and those who resist perish. Their leader was a man called Kai Lin, innate, late true key. I rode into a place called Maple Leaf Village and found 3 men in black on horses in the middle of it, driving crying children away from a house and telling the owner that his medicinal field had been requisitioned. The owner tried the only defense he had. Ding said he had been a disciple of the Divine Sword Sect. They laughed at him. Then his wife came out of the house and threw him a sword and picked up another one herself, and the two of them fought 3 men in their own yard and were losing. I came up the lane at a walk and the woman turned around. I knew her face. Cousin, I said. Wang Meilin. 6 years out of the sect, married to a man named Ding Tao, who was on the ground at that moment with a cut across his ribs and no intention of staying down. A daughter called Mia, who was maybe 5, and a second one about a year old. I looked at the yard and the field, and the man getting back up with a sword he did not know how to hold properly. I thought, this is quite good too. Then I turned to the riders. I am an inner sect disciple of the Divine Sword Sect. Do you think I am scared? 3 men who had been enormous 4 seconds earlier folded up into a much smaller shape. That night, I sat at her table and put 3 bottles on it. 2 of them were key and blood pills, which are worth about a year of that farm. The third one I put down last. Marrow cleansing demonic pill, I said. It will cleanse your 2 children's marrow and improve their bone structure. Start at 7 years old. 1 grain in warm water, with the fist form, every morning, no exceptions. Then I told her the other half. The existence of this pill must never be spoken of by anyone in this house. Not once. Not to family. If it spreads, disaster will follow it here. She asked why. I did not answer her properly because the proper answer is complicated. I did not want to say it out loud in a farmhouse. Her grandfather rang a bell on a hill for 64 years, so that nobody would come looking for what he had. Ding hid her whole existence to keep her out of it. Ding sent me a riddle instead of a goodbye. It led to a hillside in Mangnu County, and everything I am, all of it, the body, the domain, the flight, every single thing, came out of a stone I took out of that cave. Old Wang paid for my entire life in advance and never saw 1 hour of it. If it were not for the old man's sake, I would not have handed a pill like that to anybody. The Black Riders business itself turned out to be a fraud, which I enjoyed enormously. The 3 riders tried to run in the morning. I put a line of sword chi through a boulder in front of their horses, and then they took me somewhere I did not expect, which was into the fortified compound of the Jin family. This humble one is actually not a member of the Black Riders gang, one of them said on his knees. We are members of the Jin family. The local clans had been dressing as the refugee gang and robbing their own countryside, so that the Divine Sword Sect would come in, exterminate the refugees, and hand the clans everything the refugees owned. Patriarch Jin did not blink. Ding ordered his own men given 80 strokes each as an example, on the spot, in front of me, and offered me wine. Then the actual gang broke out of the hills to escape. The clans intercepted them, and Jin came to me at the edge of the field. Young hero Lin, the Black Riders are about to escape. Please make your move. It is not time for me to act yet, I said. You go first. I will simply back you up. There is a small silence that happens when 3 patriarchs realize the young man from the sect has understood exactly what they are and has decided to let both sides bleed first. I sat on a hill and watched. To me it was children fighting. When it was down to the last of it, I walked into the middle. Kai Lin was leaning on his spear, covered in his own men. Is the Divine Sword Sect also so indiscriminate? This is Divine Sword Sect territory, I said. Breaking the rules has to be punished. 1 light stroke and his left arm came off at the shoulder and he stayed standing. Then I turned to the 3 patriarchs, and deceiving the Divine Sword Sect with false information is equally unforgivable. You 3, commit suicide as an apology. Shu began to object. The other 2 struck themselves in the crown of the head where they stood without a word and went down. Then Shu was standing alone in a field with a sect disciple looking at him, and somebody threw a bucket of cold water over him, and he did it too. Kai Lin took what was left of his people out of the prefecture with 1 arm and a spear. Thank you, sir, he said on the way past. The sect leader liked the report enough to summon me. Your handling of the situation in Chuyun Prefecture was excellent. And then he offered me the thing that every disciple in the Divine Sword Sect wants and cannot get. A place in the Royal Dragon Guardian Pavilion. 30 years of service to the throne in exchange for resources the sect simply does not have. 4 of the 5 celestial beings this sect has ever produced came through it. I said no before he finished the sentence. Sect leader, please leave this opportunity to senior brother Chang. Are you sure you want to give it up? Your disciple will never regret it. My master tested me about it afterward, the sneaky way, by leaning his own martial intent on me while we talked about vegetables, waiting for a crack. I stood there and discussed carrots. Ding stopped arguing after that. I think he decided I had gone strange in a way that was working, which is the most any teacher can hope for. Meanwhile, at the Bull's Horn in Manhwa County, an old man with white hair arrived carrying a complete set of maps, the leader of the moon worship cult. Ding had been looking for the holy cave for most of a century. Ding stood at those broken doors and wept, and then he went in, and there was no divine pressure. The heavenly wolf on the throne was a dried husk with a hole cut in the chest. An outsider entered here and took the divine core from within the celestial wolf. We came too late. Without that core, there is no deification. That was the whole plan of that cult, the entire 1,000-year project. It was a hole in a mummy. Then somebody in that cave said the sentence that I would like framed. The one who annihilated the saintess. Ding could suppress the transformations. It is the same person. We must lure him out, said the cult leader, and retrieve the divine core. Good luck. I was at home making a formation plate. That is the least dramatic sentence in this account. It was the most useful month of that decade. I ground my first jade plate, set an origin stone at the center, layered 2 basic arrays over it, and produced a stable field that pulled ambient chi inward and held it. 10% less origin stone burned per breakthrough. 10%. I was thrilled. There is a version of me who never fought anybody and spent 40 years doing that, and I suspect he was happier. And then the river finished. I had been running the Great River Sword Chi in my sea of consciousness every night for years, and one evening it stopped needing me. It simply ran. A river of blades from one horizon to the other, turning over on itself forever, with nobody driving it. I took it a few hundred miles out to a cliff face where nothing lived, and I let it out. Inside a radius of about half a mile, every scrap of ki in the world turned into swords and joined the current. I put one finger out and touched the cliff. The hole in that cliff was 80 feet across. Is this the power of the heavenly phenomenon level? The cost was my spirit. 2 or 3 uses, and I was finished for the day, hollow, unable to hold a thought. But that was the ceiling of the world. I could touch it 2 or 3 times a day, on a hill, alone, with nobody watching. I found out what it was for about 4 months later. I was flying home at night, and there was an army in the forest below me. 10,000 men in dark green armor marching in column under the trees at night, and every one of them was at least a ranked martial artist. A celestial being flying point, and at the tail of the column, 1,000 more in black with a smell coming off them I had learned to recognize on a road 200 miles away. Their heading was my mountain. The celestial up front felt me looking. Ding stopped the column twice and sent scouts up and got nothing because he was looking for a person. I was 4,000 feet above him in a divinely forged cloak. I could not let them get to the sect. It is that simple. Everything I did that night comes out of that one sentence, and none of it was brave, so I stopped hiding and dropped into the road in front of them. Such a powerful martial Dao legion. Where do you intend to go? We are merely passing through. If you are going to attack the Divine Sword Sect, then it concerns me. 10,000 men roared at once, and out of that roar the war spirit came up, and it was a saber, an enormous curved blade condensing out of the collective will of an entire legion, and it came down on me. I let the river out. The saber broke on it. It did not slow down. It did not glance off. It went into the current and came apart. I heard the Celestial say, in a completely different voice than the one he had been using, could it be that the intelligence was wrong? Then I exhaled and struck. The moon went out behind a river of blades. The Legion's shield formation held for about 1 breath, which was a genuinely impressive performance, and then the entire thing went away. When I came down, there was a trench in that forest 100 feet across and 300 long, red at the bottom of it, and steam coming off the sides. The celestial being was lying at the end of it in pieces of armor. Heavenly, he said. Heavenly phenomenon. Then he died. I stood at the edge of that trench and said the only thing that came into my head, which was, I did not control it well. The power seems to have been too great. The half-demons ran. I went after them as a streak of gold, and they turned and transformed and formed up. The domain came out and stripped every one of them back into a frightened man in the dark, and I finished it. I took one prisoner, an elder of the cult. Ding did the most unexpected thing anyone has ever done to me, which is that he knelt down and offered me a job. I am willing to revere you as a divine emissary. I only ask that you lead my Mei Ye holy cult to restore the glory of the Taiping sect. Then, trying to sweeten it, he gave me the news. The Chen family had betrayed the crown. The White Marsh Legion had been destroyed. 2 of the Empire's 4 ace legions were broken. Prince Ning was marching west. I listened to all of it. Then I put the sword through his forehead. Ding said you first. That was the whole eulogy. I did it because continuing the conversation seemed like a lot of trouble. I have thought about that sentence a great many times since. I am not going to defend it. I hunted the ones who had scattered until dawn. 10,000 men in one night, and I want to be exact about the arithmetic I did on my way home, because it is the arithmetic that lets a person do this and keep sleeping. Killing 10,000 to save tens of thousands. That is what I told myself. I still tell myself that. I noticed that I have never once said it out loud to another living person. At first light, I threw a crumpled ball of paper down at the doors of the main hall and left before it landed. The guard on the door looked up and saw nothing at all. The council read it and went white and sent riders to Prince Qi, the Night King, and the Ding family. And a day later, a hidden sword reconnaissance patrol walked out of the tree line into a trench 300 yards long and stood at the edge of it, and one of them said, "Am I hallucinating?" Tang Heng came out to look at it himself. Ding walked the whole length. Ding went down into it and put his hand on the wall. "No," he said. "Not even a top-tier celestial phenomenon grade heavenly human could do this." Then, after a while, "Unless it is a heavenly human who has comprehended a heavenly phenomenon grade martial intent," which is a description of the old martial emperor and of nobody else alive. And standing in my trench, the old man remembered a text he had read once in the archives of the Royal Dragon Guardian Pavilion. A region that mortals cannot reach. Something hidden by somebody's power. Ding had read it as a fable at the time. "This senior," he said, "is becoming more and more mysterious." The Empire's answer to all of this was to authorize the Divine Sword Sect its own permanent legion under Tang Heng, and to make me help recruit for it, which is the most galling thing in this entire account. At the Wu River, the front stopped moving. Prince Ning had lost a legion and an army of half-demons and had no idea to what. An initiative is a thing you cannot get back. I flew out to the front at night sometimes just to look at it. It cost me almost nothing by then. The domain lifts, the river carries, and a man can cross 2 prefectures before the moon moves. And then, on an island in Pingza Lake, inside my own gathering formation, with 2 origin stones burning, I became a celestial being. The 9 strands came apart. A 10th was born out of the wreckage, and then all 10 came out of my body through 10 points at once, wove themselves into a canopy over my head, and started drinking the origin qi of the world directly. My consciousness went out with them. Out past the island, out over the lake, out until I was the sky and the ground and everything standing on it. And then it hit something. There was a membrane over the world. Smooth. Total. It did not push back and it did not resist. It simply ended. My understanding ran along the underside of it looking for an edge and did not find one, and the enlightenment broke off there. The true essence came down through the crown of my head. I went up off the island into the air. Heavenly human realm, early stage. Heartless sword intent. True image. 99 out of 100. 99. It had been 89 that afternoon. One glimpse of the underside of that thing was worth 10 points. What exactly was that membrane? I flew home at dawn with the entire question of my life finally in one piece, and I have never wanted anything as badly as I wanted to know what was on the other side of that ceiling. The wanting is the reason for everything that happens next. But first, there was a fish. 2 brothers were out on that same lake a few nights later, hand-lining for a qinglong fish. Because a qinglong fish sells for enough to matter, and they were trying to raise 50 taels. They caught something. Then their boat stopped existing. The thing that came up under it was 30 feet long and had been a fish once. The older brother got out one word, which was run, and then the lake was quiet. I pulled the younger one out on a plank and put a column of water up under the fish and dropped it on the shore. "Immortal," he kept saying. "Immortal." Ding was maybe 14. And when he could talk, the story he told me made me put my hand over my face. The Divine Sword Sect entrance examination is free. It has been free for 400 years. It is free in the charter and free on the notice boards. The recruiters who come down to the counties charge 50 taels for the right to participate. His family had borrowed the 50 taels. Ding had failed the assessment, which is normal for a boy with no training. The money was gone and the debt was not. The 2 of them had been fishing at night for a year to pay it. Now there was one of them. I checked his fist. Self-taught, off a village manual, driven to major achievement by a boy with no teacher and no pills and no time. His bones were good. I corrected 2 errors in his form and told him to go to the examination. The fish I left with him, and he could not carry it, so I ended up carrying the fish, which is how I came home at dawn with a 30-foot mutant across my shoulders like a man in a folktale. Zhenming came out of the shed and made a sound. "Senior brother Lin, you really ate the fish?" "Not yet, but shortly." My master arrived at a run and identified it in 4 seconds and became genuinely distressed. "That is a spirit fish. You can grow a dragon pearl from it. You can refine a breakthrough pill out of it. Lin Dao, it is such a waste." "No waste," I said. "Once it is in your stomach, it is not wasted." We had sashimi cut thinner than a cicada's wing. We had a spiced hot pot. We had thick slices seared on iron. We had a milk-white soup that took 9 hours. My master ate raw fish for the first time in 81 years of life and sat back and said, with real emotion, that he never knew it could be eaten that way. Zhenming spent 2 full days breaking down what was left. Even the bones went into stock. Ding talked about that fish for the next 6 years. Then I went to the sect leader about the 50 taels. Ding heard me out and then rubbed his eyes. Ding did not defend it, which surprised me. It is not the fees, he said. The fees are a symptom. There are only so many places. Every commoner you bring in is one fewer for the families who have supported this sect for 300 years. You cannot have your cake and eat it too. Then he looked at me for a moment and changed direction entirely. How about this? I will put you in charge of this year's recruitment. I started shaking my head immediately. Do a good job, he said, and establish a proper set of rules. I will exempt you from all intersect missions, permanently. I would like to say I fought that offer for at least a few seconds. Fine, I said. I will take the job. And I want to be fair to myself, because there was a second reason, and it was real. If a school has problems this bad in something as fundamental as bringing in students, how can it possibly become strong? Elder Yang walked me through the process with the smooth patience of a man who has been doing something wrong for 30 years and has excellent paperwork for it. 529 commoner candidates, from an entire prefecture, almost all of them mediocre. I read the list twice and then told him I was not going to start the examination. And then the second thing came out, which was worse, and which he explained to me in the tone of a man explaining that water is wet. Any commoner who passes is required to become the student of a local master, which means, for a boy with no family and no connections, that he is now owned. That has practically become an unspoken rule inside the Divine Sword Sect, said Elder Yang comfortably. That night, a black cloak appeared inside Tang Heng's command tent in the middle of a guarded camp, and the guards outside did not turn around. The old man came up out of his chair. I asked him one question. Do you know why the Divine Sword Sect has been unable to produce a new celestial being? Ding started to answer. I did not let him. You have overlooked the most fundamental issue, recruitment. If recruitment fails to uncover true gems and instead brings in the mediocre to fill positions, what future can the Divine Sword Sect possibly have? Then I left. Ding woke the sect leader personally that night, and by dawn he had the whole picture. I am told he went quiet in a way that frightened people who had known him for 60 years. Anyone who dares disrupt the normal recruitment process, he said, should not blame me for turning ruthless. 2 days later, he sent for me. Among your peers, he said, you should be considered one of the best. I underestimated you back then. A serious illness requires drastic measures, I said. The reform must be thorough. If you meet obstruction below Grandmaster, handle it by sect rules. Above Grandmaster, I will back you. Then, as I was standing up, entirely conversationally, Lin Dao, do you know a senior who likes to wear black cloaks? I did not blink. I have had a great deal of practice. This senior appeared a few times and gave guidance to disciple. And the old man's whole face softened, because that meant the mysterious immortal had taken an interest in a young man of the Divine Sword Sect, and he sat there beaming at me like a grandfather. I walked out of that tent into the sunshine and thought with real admiration that Tang Heng really knows how to make connections and deceive people. The Divine Sword Sect holds 18 prefectures. I started with 1. The first thing I did was put my spiritual sense on the bones of every candidate they had already gathered. The number that came back was wrong, not low, wrong. The proportion of usable bone structure was almost identical among the commoners and among the boys sent up by the martial families, and both proportions were about a third of what they should have been. Elder Yang, these people's aptitude is not good enough. Junior brother Lin, this is normal. The chance of a genius emerging from among the common people is already very low. I turned around and walked out of the hall. The intersect assessment cannot be conducted for the time being. I am going down to the counties. Ding stood there with his mouth open, then went straight to the sect leader to complain. The sect leader listened to the whole thing and said pleasantly, just follow Lin Dao's instructions. Pingxi County first, because I knew the lake. The local disciples greeted me warmly, nodded at everything I said, and arranged a token demonstration. Just a gesture will suffice. I heard one of them say, on the other side of a wall, that he did not believe I could really do anything. They brought the candidates to the assembly ground. There were about 1,000 of them, out of a county I happened to know the population of. So I said the sentence that broke the whole system open. I remember Pingxi County has a population of around 800,000. Have the officials bring me the complete household registers, every eligible boy from 10 to 18. I will examine their bones one by one. The face of the disciple standing next to me did something I will remember on my deathbed. I went to the county office myself to collect the registers, personally, at once, in case of a fire. 110,000 boys in one county. They brought the registers in on a cart. 11 volumes, tied with cord, and the clerk who carried them in apologized for the dust and then apologized again for the mice. I sat in a courtyard for 6 days and read bones. They came through the gate in lines of 100, farm boys and cart boys, and a great many who had walked 2 days to get there because a soldier had come to their village and told them to. Most of them had never been examined by anybody in their lives. Several of them asked me whether it would hurt. On the 4th day, in the middle of the 2nd volume, a boy came through the gate that I recognized. Ding had grown. Ding was 15 now, and he had a scar on the back of one hand from a fishing line, and when he saw who was sitting behind the table, he stopped so hard the boy behind walked into him. Immortal. Somewhere in the county office of Pingza, there is a household register with his name in it. It has been in that register every single year of his life. The assessment had come through this county 9 times since he was born. 50 taels for the right to participate, a borrowed 50 taels, a drowned brother, a year of night fishing to pay off a debt for an examination that has been free for 400 years. I wrote his name on my list without saying anything, because if I had opened my mouth right then, I would have said something I could not take back in front of 40 local officials. Out of that county, I took 300. Several of them had bone structures that would make an elder cry. Every one of them had been sitting in a village that had never been visited by anybody, because visiting villages is work and forging a list is not. I really thought there were no good talents among the common people. I said that out loud to the local branch in a completely level voice, and nobody in that courtyard was warm again for the rest of the day. 2 weeks, 10 counties, more than 1 million boys examined, almost 2,000 qualified candidates out of one prefecture. The prefecture's previous annual yield was 529. Elder Yang read the tally, and his hands started to shake, and to his credit he did not pretend. This is impossible. It has never been done before. What you are doing is breaking the rules. The past is the past, I said. From now on, all recruitment will be conducted according to my rules. Junior brother Lin, are you joking with me? You will find out soon enough whether I am qualified. Then I went to Tang Heng and asked to borrow the legion. The whole legion. 10,000 armored men, currently sitting on a front line to run an entrance examination. Using a martial Dao legion to recruit new members, said the old man. What a grand gesture. Then he pointed out correctly that a legion cannot be moved while there is a front. So I lowered my voice. That senior said the army of Prince Ning's mansion will not be able to cross the Wu River. Ding hit the table with his palm. Fine, the entire Divine Sword Legion is temporarily lent to you. Half a day later, there were columns of armored men going out into 3 prefectures and 17 counties with a copy of my procedure and orders to collect household registers by force if necessary. And the very first thing I did with them was surround the examination hall and place every official inside it under guard. Lin Dao, said Elder Yang from behind a line of spears. How did you do that? Elder Yang, you should think carefully about how you are going to explain yourself. The elders came for me in a body, of course. More than a dozen of them went to the sect leader together. The argument they made was the one that always gets made, which is that if Lin Dao is allowed to continue acting recklessly, it will lead to unpredictable consequences, and Tang Heng came out from behind the screen. So this is how loyal you are to the Divine Sword Sect. Ding had my tally sheet in his hand. For years you have been telling this seat that there are not enough good seedlings and taking bronze bones to fill the quota. Look at this list. From Pingza County alone, Lin Dao brought back 2,000 at silver bone or above. Ding let that sit for a moment. I think it is you parasites who have been undermining the foundation of the Divine Sword Sect. I want to describe what happened in that hall for the next hour because I have thought about it every time somebody tells me a system cannot be changed. They started by defending themselves individually, which was a mistake because the old man had my ledgers and he read from them. Ding read out a county that had reported 40 candidates in a year and had 11,000 eligible boys in its registers. Ding read out the name of the elder whose nephew held the assessment rights there. Ding read out the fee, 50 taels, which is not in any sect document anywhere, and then he read out the number of years it had been collected. Then he asked one question and did not raise his voice. How many of the ones you turned away are dead by now? Nobody answered that. There is no answer to that. A boy with a silver bone who never gets assessed goes back to a village and is a farmer, and a farmer in the Great Chang in the years I have been describing to you does not reliably get to be old. More than a dozen elders lost their posts that week, including one with real power. Their students were audited, which produced a second, smaller scandal that I will not bore you with. 2 of them tried to go over Tang Heng's head to the sect leader, which was educational for everybody. Nobody came near me again. The selection ran 2 months. Transport ran 3. 30,000 candidates passed the first round and came up the mountain. The assembly ground could not hold them. They had to be housed in the war camps. The 10,000 who had been gathered the old way were tested against the same standard, and not one of them reached silver bone. Not one. We sent them home and were left with fewer than 3,000 from a process that had run for 30 years. Then I raised the number of trials from 3 to 6, because if we were doing it properly, we might as well do it properly. Final intake: 3,218 inner disciples, 8,000 servants. And the servants that year had better bone structures than the inner disciples of the year before. Half a year of work, plus an entire system of cross-checks and audits and rotating inspectors that I designed myself out of pure spite, and that is still running. The cost was that I offended most of the senior people in the Divine Sword Sect. A significant number of them hate me to this day, properly, personally, with a warmth they do not extend to actual enemies. Would I care? I had a bell and a permanent exemption from missions. They could hate me at length. Elsewhere, the princes were making their last plan. Over the Jade Capital, a celestial phenomenon had appeared. An actual one, the kind that had not been seen since the old martial emperor 200 years ago, and Prince Ning stood in his hall looking at the report and said how despicable. I never expected she would still manage to create one. His advisor was a Taoist called Xian, supreme elder of the Zhenwu Temple, which is the ancestral temple of the entire Dachang Taoist order. Ding explained the failure without softening it. The plan had needed 3 principalities to break from the crown. They had not. So there was one road left. Every prince marches on the capital at once before she consolidates. Then Xian leaned in and told him one more thing, quietly. The prince nearly came out of his chair. Master Xian, are you sure? And at the Zhenwu Temple, that same month, a man rode in on a donkey, sitting backwards, with an empty wine gourd on his hip. Ding went through 100,000 disciples, and none of them appeared to see him. The donkey walked into the main hall and stopped and turned around, so that it was facing the leadership with its tail. They came off their seats. "Greetings, Grandmaster." "How?" said the old man. "Did you manage to turn such a perfectly good situation into this?" Then he left them a small formation plate and told them not to use it unless it was absolutely necessary, or they would face endless trouble, and rode out backwards. One of the elders recognized where that plate had come from and went the color of paper, because if it failed, the consequences would not be confined to the Great Chang. They would be a problem for the entire Yangjiao region. I did not know any of that. What I knew was that the rebel camps on the Wu River were empty one morning. 3 princely legions crossed the river and did not pursue anybody. The crown ordered every loyal force to intercept and stop them reaching the capital. Every rebel army in the empire began to converge into one river of men, and on top of that, the neighboring states of Jia and Dali started hitting the border passes, because when a house is burning, the neighbors come for the furniture. I read all of it and put it down. The situation is changing way too fast, and then I decided it was not relevant to me, which was, in fairness, insane, and went back to the only problem I actually cared about. My sword intent had been sitting at 99 out of 100 for 2 years, and every time I reached, I could feel that membrane over the world. It was getting clearer, not weaker. The battle for the Jade Capital ran for a day and a night. The rebel camps covered 100 miles. There were more than 1 million men, and better than 100 celestial beings in the sky on each side, and arrows came apart in the air from the sheer density of ki over the field, so the soldiers cut steps into the city walls with their weapons and went up them like ants. By dawn, the outer walls were gone. Then the Grand Empress Dowager came out of the Hall of the Candle Dragon on foot. "More than 200 years ago," she said, "you succeeded. This time, how could I let you have your way again?" And the clouds over the Jade Capital were pushed apart from below by a fox with 9 tails. It went up until it was taller than the city. One tail moved once, and an elite legion of the Great Chang was replaced by a crater, not routed. The legion seemed to vanish into thin air. Then that tail was gone. Under the military blockade, she had 9 celestial attacks, and no more. And everyone on that field understood the accounting instantly. 4 tails, 4 legions. A dozen supreme celestial beings hit her at once. Someone said in the sky with contempt that it is not even a celestial phenomenon, merely a pseudo-celestial phenomenon attack. Then the whole group was scattered and several of them simply came apart in the air. 3 tails left, and the fox began to fade, and then it began to fill back in. So 3 of the supreme celestials took out formation plates. They aged as they held them. I mean visibly, rapidly, in front of 1 million people, 3 men trading decades for seconds, and above them a schematic the size of the capital unfolded across the sky in the arrangement of heaven, earth, and man. The Grand Empress Dowager looked up at it and smiled. "You cannot stop the Yao race's return." Then she crushed a bead in her palm, and her body came apart into white light. The light went up into the fox. The 9 tails came back all at once and drove down into the ground. White light came out of the fox's mouth and the schematic broke. The 3 plates were thrown across the sky in pieces. The 3 men who had aged 80 years to hold them turned to ash between one breath and the next. And then the sky cracked. Not the clouds, the sky. Lines went out across the whole dome of it in every direction like a web, from horizon to horizon, over an entire region of the world. Is the barrier of the Yangjiao region about to collapse? The cracks faded. Nobody who saw them was relieved. Every man on that field who understood what he had just looked at came to the same conclusion, which is that a bigger trouble was still coming. In the neighboring state of Xia, its martial emperor stood in a courtyard looking up at the same web of lines and shook. I never thought I could not escape this calamity after all. Ding is the keeper of a divine artifact. Ding knew something the others did not, and the same thing was happening in every country in the Yangjiao region at the same hour, and every keeper in every one of them looked up, and on a bell tower in the mountains of Xuan province, at that exact moment, the shadow of my martial intent began to beat against the inside of my skull like something trying to get out. I saw the cracks. From 500 miles away, at ground level, I saw them. I did not wait for dark. I went up in daylight and flew 150 miles out to empty mountains and let my intent go. And the membrane gave, not because I had grown into it. It gave because somebody had put a crack in it from the other side, in that same hour, and for one moment there was a seam. My thoughts went through and touched something. I have no better word than vast. Vast and aware of itself and entirely indifferent, and a strange power came back down the contact into me. When I came out of it, the chi in the air for miles in every direction was not something I reached for. It was mine the way my hand is mine, without the river, without a technique, without effort. And hanging over the mountains above my head, there was the shadow of a sword the size of a mountain range. Heartless sword, intent. Celestial phenomenon. Great river sword chi, second layer. A strike of the kind that had taken everything I had and left me hollow for a day was now something I could do while thinking about something else. I hung in the air over an empty valley for a long time, and the only thought I could get to arrive in order was, strange. What exactly was I seeing before? I got home to find that my eagle had also had a night. Little Black had come back listless a week earlier and then stopped eating, then lost every feather he had and spent 4 days as the ugliest animal in the empire, sitting on a perch looking personally insulted. Then all his blood and chi gathered into one point in his chest, and his appetite came back like a door blowing open. Ding grew again, and what came in over the next month was dark crimson, spirit fish, and demonic pills probably. That is the reasonable explanation. It also happened in the same hour as the cracks. The news from the capital came a month later. My master brought it up the hill without hurrying, which told me most of it before he opened his mouth. The Jade capital was taken. The Grand Empress Dowager is dead. The rebel armies were bled white doing it. And a settlement has been reached, which is that the son of the old martial emperor takes the throne, the princes are pardoned for rebellion, and the princes receive territories, armies, and a share of the treasury. Everybody won. That is what a settlement means. It means nobody is strong enough to finish it. I laid 3 things side by side that evening. My intent broke through a membrane. My eagle was reborn. The sky cracked over an entire region. All 3 in the same hour. My master had not seen the cracks. A lot of people in the sect had. The royal family has completely lost control of the Great Chang, he said, looking at his rice. Another, bigger chaos may come. A year of quiet after that, and it was not quiet. The Legion was not disbanded. They reduced it to 5,000, which is the floor. The crown did not argue, which is its own kind of news, and in council they started using a word I had not heard in an official document before. There has been a significant increase in alienation phenomena in various regions, mutations, all over the empire, animals mostly, some not, and the imperial court had circulated a warning about it a full year before it started. The moon worship cult began moving again around the same time, which surprised nobody, and then, on an ordinary morning, the new head of the examination hall came through the doors of a council session at a dead run. Elder Xiang, the commoner who had spent 30 years arguing for a bigger commoner quota and losing, and who now had my job. We have discovered a peerless martial arts genius. Somebody laughed and asked whether it was a jade bone. No, said Elder Xiang. No, a precious bone. The hall stopped. There are 5 grades: ordinary, bronze, silver, gold, jade. Above jade there is treasure, and in the 1,000-year history of the Divine Sword Sect there has never been one. Not once. They brought her in. She was 10 years old. Every spiritual sense in that hall came down on her at once. She stood there in the middle of it in a plain robe. Then the peak masters started grabbing. I mean physically. Grown men who have led armies took hold of a child's sleeves from both sides at once. I will take this disciple. Why should you accept it? And the sect leader waded in with the warmest, kindest face I have ever seen on him. If you become my disciple, you will be the sect leader's personal disciple, and... She burst into tears. And then Tang Heng came in through the doors like weather. A precious genius who becomes your disciple will be ruined by you. Ding crouched down in front of her, and this bald old terror with a sword the size of a door on his back, who kills celestial beings and lies to his own leadership, said, "Little child, I am the strongest celestial in the Divine Sword Sect. Become my disciple, and I will teach you to fly like a bird." "Grandpa?" Can you really fly? And he picked her up and took her out through the roof. The whole hall heard her laughing all the way up, and 30 senior masters of the Divine Sword Sect stood in the wreckage of their own dignity and said nothing at all. My master came up my hill that evening humming. They found a jade bone this year, he said, and a treasure bone, an actual treasure bone. Ding sat down on my step with his own wine. They say a talent like that is comparable to a perfect innate, a true prodigy. Then he laughed because he could not help it. The elders with real power almost came to blows that day. Later, they were taken away by the Grand Uncle Master. I sat there with him and let him enjoy it. I thought about the difference he had just described without noticing it. A perfect innate has to be clawed out of a man over 20 years in the dark, one impossible step at a time, and the world will kill you for having it. A treasure bone is simply issued to a 10-year-old at birth. And at the Zhenwu temple that same week, a man on a donkey was receiving instructions. I did not learn about that conversation for a long time. When I did, one detail in it went through me like cold water. I am going to make you wait for it the same way I had to. Ding came in the way he always comes in, sitting backwards, empty gourd on his hip, through 100,000 disciples who did not appear to see him. And the supreme elders of the ancestral temple of the entire Dachang Taoist order stood up when he entered and did not sit down again. Then somebody who was not in the room spoke to him. The barrier is currently unstable. It is interfering with our ability to detect treasure bone level genius, and treasure grade weapons have begun appearing in various places. Then the order. Geniuses of the treasure bone level and above must not fall into the hands of those martial arts forces. The 3 great sects will gather every one of them and send them up. And then the old man, who had crossed a snowfield on a donkey to buy a wine recipe off a stranger, said the following sentence to a room full of people who bowed when he came in. The last time we caused such a huge mess, the higher-ups are already extremely angry. Even I was punished. The higher-ups, the man who handed me the great river sword chi on a piece of jade in exchange for the method of making liquor, which I stole from a world he has never heard of, has higher-ups, and he has been punished by them. Half a month later, a celestial being from the Zhenwu temple came to the Divine Sword Sect. His name was Hongyuan Zhenren, and he asked for the hall to be cleared, and then he said it plainly. I hope you will hand over the precious bone-level genius. Tang Heng came out of his chair. Even the royal family has not gotten involved. A genius of the precious bone level, said Hongyuan Zhenren, should not be in your Divine Sword Sect. And then he opened it up because he had been told to, and because he did not think any of us would be a problem afterward. Among all the top powerhouses in the history of the Great Chang, he said, there has never been a genius with a treasure bone, not one, including both martial emperors. Those men were high-grade jade bones, all of them. And treasure bones are found at a rate of no fewer than 10 a year. Every single one of them is sent beyond the boundary. These precious bone geniuses, he said, have no future in our human realm. Somebody in that hall said, human realm, beyond the boundary. You only need to know, he said, that there is always someone better. And then the sentence that I have not been able to put down since. The purpose of the human realm is simply to cultivate martial artists of the treasure bone level and above. Tang Heng, who is over 300 years old and has read things in the archives of the Royal Dragon Guardian Pavilion that nobody else in this province has read, sat down slowly and said nothing because he had finally found the text that fable came from. It was sitting in his own hall wearing a Taoist robe. The girl's ceiling, they explained, once she is properly trained up there, is a heavenly human with a celestial phenomenon intent. That is the top. That is as far as the human realm is permitted to take anyone, which is exactly where I am standing. They paid us for her. That is the part I want you to hold on to. They put a lacquer case on the table with a Qianren pill in it, which gives a sect a better than even chance of producing a new celestial being, and they promised one for every future find. A pill for a child. Standing offer. Renewable. And everybody in that hall took the deal, including me, because there was no version of that afternoon in which anybody did not. So, 20 years ago, a man read my name off a list in a courtyard and sent me to the one posting in the Divine Sword Sect that has never produced anything, after taking every copper I had for the privilege. I was 15. I had a bundle, a bribe receipt in the form of nothing at all, and a hill. Last month I put one finger out at a cliff face and took 80 feet of mountain out of it. I am not the strongest thing in the sky anymore, only because I have never let anybody find out I am in the sky. And this morning, like every morning, I got up in the dark, checked 12 hourglasses against the stars, waited for the last grain to fall, and rang a bell. I am going to keep doing that. The bell is at 7,080 out of 10,000. There are 8 years left on the bar. Here is what I have not told anyone. When my intent finally went through that membrane, I did not break it. I have gone over that hour 1,000 times. The timing is not a coincidence, and it was never mine. Somebody put a crack in the ceiling of the world from the other side, and I happened to be pressing on it at that exact second, and I went through the gap that they made. which means that for one moment, something on the other side of that barrier had its attention on this region, and something on this side of it went out to meet it, and an old man on a donkey rode across a snowfield to buy a wine recipe off me, and traded me the technique that took me to the top of what this world is allowed to have, and that old man answers to somebody. I do not think he was passing through. I have stopped believing anybody is passing through. I have a wolf demon's divine core burned into my own bones, and a cult that has spent 100 years hunting the man who took it. I have a black cloak that 2 celestial beings have died wearing. I have a sect full of senior men who hate me and have no idea why they are wrong to. I have a girl of 10 being carried beyond the boundary in a lacquer case's worth of payment, and a boy from a lake who is going to be somebody, and a bald old man in the sky who thinks I am the protege of a mysterious immortal. I have never once told the truth to any of them, and now I know what all of it is for. The human realm is a nursery. 83 prefectures, 2 thrones, 1,000 years of dynasties and rebellions, and men aging themselves to ash over a formation plate, and the entire arrangement exists to grow 10 children a year for somebody upstairs. Fine. I am not a treasure bone. Nobody planted me. Nobody has me on a list. Nobody is coming to collect me at 10 years old. Nobody upstairs has ever once looked at the bell tower. I am the weed in the nursery, and every single morning, before anyone else on this mountain is awake, I am getting taller.